There is a moment in an early episode of SpongeBob SquarePants where a small yellow sponge throws a party in his own home, gets accidentally locked out on the front step, and while he is standing there in the dark trying to get back inside, the police arrive and arrest him. Not for the noise, not for anything a reasonable person would call a crime. They arrest him for not inviting them to the party, and he spends the entire night in a cell, listening from a distance to his own house have fun without him. I have watched a great many cartoons in my life, and that scene still stops me cold, because it is played for a laugh, and it is really a portrait of a town where the people wearing the badges answer to no one at all. Tonight we are going through all of it, every arrest, every jail, every officer, every absurd little law, the whole strange record of how policing works in Bikini Bottom. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, let your eyes go soft, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these long, quiet ones for you. Let me start with the thing that makes all of this stranger than it first appears, which is the sheer scale of the force. When you picture law enforcement in a cartoon about a fry cook who flips hamburgers, you probably imagine one bumbling officer in a little boat, a single figure who turns up now and then to write a ticket. That is not what these episodes actually give you. Encyclopedia SpongeBobia, the fan encyclopedia that most viewers treat as the closest thing to an official record, describes the Bikini Bottom Police Department as a large and heavily equipped institution. Over the years, the writers have put on screen police cars, police trucks, police planes, police helicopters, and police boats, including the big chrome boatmobiles styled after old Chevrolet Impalas. There has been a SWAT team. There have been dog units, the underwater equivalent of a K-9 division. There are multiple bases and stations rather than one lonely precinct. And beyond the ordinary patrol officers, the series scatters in specialized branches that get referenced across different episodes, which is where the whole thing starts to feel less like a small-town sheriff's office and more like a sprawling bureaucracy with a department for absolutely everything. There is a sanitation police whose entire job is keeping Bikini Bottom clean, which is how you end up with citizens being cited and hauled off for littering as if it were a serious felony. There is a highway speed patrol for the roads. There is, and I genuinely love that this exists, a music police, an actual unit concerned with what sounds people are making. Prison guards and security guards get sorted into their own categories. And when you lay all of that out, a picture forms that the writers never state out loud, but keep quietly confirming. This is a town with an enormous, well-funded, many-armed law enforcement apparatus. It has the trucks and the planes and the specialized divisions of a real metropolis. What it does not have, and this is the whole engine of the comedy, is any sense of proportion about when to actually use any of it. You can see the mismatch most clearly in the vehicles. A police force builds helicopters and planes and chrome boatmobiles for one reason: to close distance fast on something dangerous, to be everywhere at once when everywhere matters. That is what all that horsepower is for. And yet when you watch these machines actually put to use, they are scrambled for a sponge who stepped out of a party, a cashier who grabbed a wallet, a woman who dropped a note. The gap between the capability and the target is the joke, but it is also the whole diagnosis folded into a single image. Real menace, on the rare occasion it appears, tends to slip away on foot while the fleet sits idle in the lot. It is only ever the harmless who seem to warrant the full weight of the motor pool. That gap is the thing my mind keeps circling back to. In the real world, we tend to assume that a bigger police force means a more capable one, that all that equipment must be pointed at real danger. The argument these episodes keep making, week after week, is the exact opposite. Bikini Bottom is handed every tool a police force could dream of, and then we watch those tools turned, over and over, on the pettiest and most harmless targets imaginable. A sponge who forgot to invite them to a party, a fry cook who chews gum too loudly, a woman who tore up a piece of paper. The planes and the helicopters and the SWAT team are all there, and the town uses them the way a bored child uses a magnifying glass on an ant. Read that way, the joke is not really that the police are incompetent. The joke is that competence was never the point. Power was the point, and we get to watch what unchecked, unaccountable power does when it has nothing serious to occupy it and a whole toolbox to reach into. I want to be careful here, because this is a comedy first, and I do not want to make it sound grimmer than it plays. Nobody is writing SpongeBob as a solemn indictment of any real institution. The cops in Bikini Bottom are not a criminal conspiracy. There is no bribery ring, no secret mob connection, no organized scheme running under the surface. What the canon actually supports is something smaller and, if anything, more relatable. It supports pettiness. It supports the abuse of a little scrap of authority. It supports negligence, laziness, absurd priorities, and the kind of casual cruelty that comes from people who know that whatever they do, nothing will happen to them. That is the flavor of corruption these stories traffic in, and it is worth naming precisely, because so much of what makes them funny is how recognizable that flavor is. You have almost certainly met the small version of this in your own life, the person with a clipboard and a fraction of a percent of real power who decides to make your afternoon miserable simply because they can. Bikini Bottom just hands that person a helicopter. And here is the detail that makes the whole apparatus feel truly ungoverned, the thing sitting underneath every arrest in this video. Nobody in Bikini Bottom is clearly in charge. If you try to draw the chain of command above these officers, to find the mayor or the chief or the authority they ultimately answer to, you never get a straight answer. In some episodes there is a mayor, in others there is a president. Above all of it, at least according to certain episodes, sits King Neptune, described as the highest authority in the sea, a literal ocean god with a crown and a short temper. That is a truly inconsistent power structure, and the effect is the same whether the writers planned it or not. When the government of a place is a mayor one week and a monarch the next and a president the week after that, there is no stable institution above the police to rein them in. There is no oversight board a citizen could appeal to, no consistent authority that would ever review a bad arrest. The officers of Bikini Bottom operate in a vacuum, and vacuums are where petty power grows without any limit. So that is the frame for everything that follows tonight. A huge, capable-looking force, with every piece of equipment you could name, sitting on top of a town with no coherent government above it, pointed almost entirely at the smallest possible offenders, while the actual dangers of Bikini Bottom, and there are a genuine few, tend to slip right through their fingers. Once you see that shape, you cannot unsee it, and it turns what looks like a string of silly gags into something with an odd, consistent logic humming underneath. The writers built a police state, and then made it too lazy and too distracted to function as one, and somehow that is funnier and stranger than either extreme would have been on its own. Let me take you through the record, arrest by arrest, and show you just how deep it goes. Let me stay with that party a while longer, because it deserves the full telling. The episode is Party Pooper Pants, from the 3rd season, and the setup could not be more innocent. SpongeBob decides to throw a house party and invites what feels like the entire town. He wants everyone to have a wonderful time. He plans it out with the earnest care he brings to everything. And then, in the middle of his own celebration, he steps outside and the door locks behind him. He is now shut out of the party he is hosting. The house is full of his guests, the music is going, and he is on the wrong side of the door in the dark. That alone would be a complete premise, the host exiled from his own event by the simplest bad luck. But simple bad luck was never going to be the end of it. While he is out there, the police roll up, and the reason they give for detaining him is the part I keep turning over. They are upset that they were not invited. That is the offense. Not noise, not a disturbance, not any actual complaint. Their feelings are hurt that a citizen threw a party without extending an invitation to law enforcement, and so they use the badge to make him pay for the slight. He is taken in. He spends the whole night in a cell, while, somewhere across town, the party he built goes on without him, and by the time he is released, it is over. He missed all of it. The one thing he wanted, the gathering he poured himself into, happened entirely in his absence, because the police decided that their bruised egos were worth a night of a man's freedom. I called this the cleanest example of abuse of power in the whole series, and I want to defend that, because there are darker and more elaborate cases coming later tonight. What makes this one so pure is that there is no misunderstanding to hide behind. In a lot of the wrongful arrest episodes, you can at least trace a chain of confusion, a mistaken identity, a botched investigation, some fig leaf that lets the officers claim they were doing their job badly, rather than abusing it openly. Here there is nothing to misread. The police are not confused about whether SpongeBob committed a crime. They know he did not. They arrest him anyway, and the stated motive is personal grievance. It is authority used as a tool of spite, plainly, held up for you to see exactly what it is. And the fact that a children's cartoon staged that so bluntly, and got a laugh out of it, tells you how quickly the writers understood what these officers were for. Watch enough of these episodes back to back and a pattern surfaces that is honestly a little uncomfortable, in the way the best comedy is. The Bikini Bottom Police are almost never in the frame to stop harm. They are there to assert dominance over ordinary people going about ordinary lives. Think about the sanitation angle, the litter arrests. In an episode built around keeping the town beautiful, SpongeBob and Squidward set out to make Bikini Bottom cleaner and end up ticketed for littering because of a statue they build out of garbage. The exact opposite of the crime the punishment is supposed to address. The logic does not have to hold together. That is the point. The offense is decided first, and the justification is bolted on afterward. And the citizen has no standing to argue, because there is no one above the officer to argue to. We settled that already tonight. A town with no stable government, no oversight, no chain of appeal. This is what it looks like from the ground. It looks like a man locked out of his own party, taken to jail for hurting a policeman's feelings, with nowhere to complain and no one who would listen if he did. What gets me about Party Pooper Pants, and I mean this sincerely, is how completely SpongeBob accepts it. He does not rage against the injustice. He does not demand a lawyer or a phone call or an explanation. He is sad, deeply and childishly sad, that he missed his party, but the arrest itself he takes as simply a thing that happened to him, the way weather happens. That acceptance is, I think, the sharpest piece of the whole gag. The people of Bikini Bottom have lived under this kind of policing so long that being jailed for nothing does not even register as an outrage to them. It registers as bad luck. That is what a place looks like when arbitrary authority has been the norm long enough that the people beneath it have stopped expecting anything else. They do not fight it, because fighting it is not a concept they have. They just hope it is not their turn today. You see the same resignation spread across so many episodes that it starts to feel like the real setting, more than the pineapple or the Krusty Krab. Bikini Bottom is a town where being detained for a triviality is a normal Tuesday. The characters have made a kind of peace with it. Mrs. Puff, who we are going to spend real time with tonight, reaches a point where prison is a relief rather than a terror. SpongeBob treats his cell nights as unfortunate interruptions rather than violations of his rights. Even the language of protest never really shows up, because in a place with no functioning higher authority, protest has no address to be sent to. A wrongly jailed character almost never gets to appeal successfully to justice, because there is no justice system in the ordinary sense. There is only the police, and their moods, and the cells they can put you in when those moods turn against you. The reason I am lingering here before we get to the flashier cases is that this episode sets the tone for the whole record, and I would rather you carry the tone than the trivia. Everything else tonight, the 10-year sentence for a wallet, the island prison, the entire force stuffed into a safe, the little girl arrested for cookies, all of it grows out of the soil that Party Pooper Pants quietly lays down. This is a world where the police are not a shield between citizens and danger. They are a source of danger in their own right, an unpredictable one, a force that might decide on any given day that your ordinary life has offended it. And it plays as comedy, always as comedy. But the shape of it never changes, no matter how silly the surface gets. A man threw a party, forgot to invite the cops, and lost his freedom for a night over it. Hold on to that, because the pattern only deepens from here. Now I want to introduce you properly to the person who has suffered most under this system, because if you had to name a single citizen of Bikini Bottom failed hardest by its police, it would not be SpongeBob, and it would not be Patrick. It would be Mrs. Puff. She is the pufferfish who runs the boating school, SpongeBob's driving instructor, a professional woman with a job and a home and no criminal intent whatsoever. And she is, by a wide margin, the most frequently jailed named character in the entire series. Sources that have tried to count it, including a rundown from Screen Rant and the episode records over on the Fan Encyclopedia, put her number of trips to prison at around 8. She has been shown behind bars in something like 5 episodes, and arrested without always being shown in a cell in several more. For a recurring character on a children's cartoon, that is a staggering rap sheet, and what makes it land is the reason behind almost every one of those arrests. It is not her. It is him. It is SpongeBob. To understand why she keeps ending up in a cell, you have to understand the running gag underneath her whole existence, which is that SpongeBob can never, ever keep a boating license. This is one of the oldest jokes in the series, and one of the surest. He is a perpetual student. Over the years, he has technically passed the test or obtained a license a handful of times, and every single time it gets destroyed, voided, revoked, or invalidated before the episode is over. He never graduates. He is canonically incapable of holding on to the thing, and the writers have committed to that so thoroughly that any episode where he seems to finally succeed is really just setting up the moment the success gets snatched away. He is a student driver forever, and Mrs. Puff is the teacher chained to that fate, the responsible adult who keeps getting held accountable for the chaos of a pupil who cannot learn and cannot stop. The very first time she goes to jail sets the template, and it happens surprisingly early, in the first season, in an episode called Hall Monitor. SpongeBob is given the hall monitor role at boating school, complete with the sash and the hat, and he takes that tiny sliver of authority and inflates it into a full-blown crisis. He becomes convinced there is a dangerous figure loose in Bikini Bottom, an open-window maniac, and in his frantic pursuit of this menace, he tears the town apart, not realizing that the maniac leaving open windows in his wake is, of course, himself. When the police finally move in to arrest someone for the destruction, it is SpongeBob they are coming for, and Mrs. Puff steps in and takes the blame. She is the one hauled away. She goes to jail for the mess her student made, and in a broadcast from her cell she tells him, with the weary affection that becomes her signature, to come see her in 6 months. It is the first entry in a very long ledger, and already the shape is set. SpongeBob causes the harm. Mrs. Puff pays for it. The police do not look any closer than the nearest convenient adult. There is a bitter little irony in Hall Monitor that is easy to skate past, which is that the whole episode is about what happens when you give an unqualified person a badge and a sense of mission. SpongeBob in his Hall Monitor sash is a miniature of the exact problem these stories keep diagnosing in the actual police. He has a tiny amount of authority, no judgment about how to use it, and a conviction that he is protecting the town, and the result is pure destruction. The episode is basically a rehearsal, in kid-sized form, of the thing the grown-up officers do every time they show up. And then, having staged that little parable, it hands the consequences to the one person who was only trying to do her job, and the officers who arrest her never once consider that the boy in the sash might be the one they want. That is the machine. It manufactures inmates out of the innocent and lets the source of the chaos walk. The next big one comes in the second season, in No Free Rides. And this is the episode fans point to as the foundation of the whole Mrs. Puff to jail tradition, because it is the first time her downfall is truly her own undoing, tangled up with SpongeBob's. She is so desperate to be rid of him as a student, so worn down by his endless failures, that she passes him on a technicality, gives him a license he has not earned just to get him out of her classroom. His parents, thrilled, buy him a real boatmobile as a reward. And then the guilt sets in, because she knows he is not safe on the road. She knows what she has done, and in a spiral of remorse, she ends up stealing the very boat she wrongly signed off on and crashing it, right into a police boat of all things. She is arrested for boat theft. She, the instructor, the responsible party, is the one who goes down, while the unqualified driver she enabled keeps his freedom. And then, characteristically, she is let off early and punished further by being sentenced to give free lessons, which means more time with SpongeBob, which is its own kind of prison. The joke folds back on itself. Her escape from him becomes her crime, and her sentence is more of him. What I find quietly devastating about her arrests, taken as a whole, is that she is never actually a criminal in any meaningful sense. She has no villainy in her. She is not scheming, she is not dangerous, she is a tired teacher trying to survive an impossible student, and the justice system of Bikini Bottom treats her like a career offender. It fixates on her because she is convenient, because she is standing near the wreckage, because pinning it on the adult in the room saves the effort of actually working out what happened. Over and over the police reach for the easy target instead of the true cause, and the easy target is always her. The cumulative effect, across 8 or so arrests, is that a completely harmless character becomes a repeat inmate. Not because she did anything, but because the system around her cannot be bothered to distinguish between the person responsible and the person nearby. If you wanted one running example of how Bikini Bottom's policing punishes proximity rather than guilt, she is it, and we are not close to done with her tonight. The episode where her situation curdles into something almost sad is the third season one called Doing Time, and it is worth slowing right down for, because it reveals what all these arrests have done to her on the inside. It begins the way so many of them do, with a driving exam. She is testing SpongeBob, he crashes the way he always crashes, and in the aftermath she is the one taken to prison for it. Same machine, same convenient adult, Same failure to look at the actual cause. But then it does something the others do not. It follows her into the cell and watches what happens to a person who has been put through this cycle enough times. And what it finds is that she is fine. More than fine. She likes it in there. That is the turn that makes doing time stick with me. Once she is behind bars, Mrs. Puff discovers something like peace, because prison is the one place in Bikini Bottom where SpongeBob cannot reach her. No boating lessons, no crashes, no student, just quiet. It plays for laughs, of course. She settles into her cell and starts to relax. But underneath the laugh is a starkly bleak little observation, which is that the life this woman leads on the outside is so exhausting, so relentlessly damaged by the boy she is legally required to teach, that incarceration reads as a vacation. When your freedom is worse than a cell, something has gone deeply wrong with your world. And the episode lets that sit there without ever spelling it out. The joke is funny. The thing underneath the joke is not, quite. And that tension is exactly the register SpongeBob is best at. Meanwhile, SpongeBob and Patrick, racked with guilt because they know it is their fault she is in there, decide they have to break her out. The way they go about it is a small masterpiece of the series' logic about crime and consequence. They reason that to get into the prison, they need to be arrested themselves, so they set out to rob a bank, treating a serious crime as a simple errand, a means to an end, with no apparent understanding that robbing a bank is worse than anything Mrs. Puff was jailed for. When that plan tangles up, they resort to disguising themselves, and this is the detail I love. They pose as rocks. Two boys crouched under rock costumes, shuffling around the prison yard, trying to reach her. And when Mrs. Puff recognizes SpongeBob and Patrick under the disguises and starts talking to these two rocks, the guards conclude that she is hallucinating. She is having a breakdown, they figure, seeing things, talking to stones, and they treat her accordingly. Think about how much that single beat says about the competence on display. The guards of this facility cannot tell the difference between two children in cardboard rock costumes and actual rocks. A prisoner is having a full conversation with a pair of obvious disguises in the middle of the yard, and rather than investigate, rather than walk over and poke one of the rocks, the professional response is to write her off as delusional. It is the same laziness we keep finding, just relocated to the prison side of the system. The officers on the street do not look closely enough to find the real culprit, and the guards behind the walls do not look closely enough to notice two intruders in plain sight. Nobody in this apparatus, from the patrol boat to the cell block, is willing to expend the small effort that looking closely would require. And that laziness keeps getting rewarded with chaos, because a system that refuses to pay attention can be walked straight through by two idiots in rock suits. There is one more feature of doing time I have to mention, because it is a strange piece of world building and it is easy to miss. The prison she is sent to appears to hold no male inmates. It reads as a facility segregated by gender, a women's prison, which raises a whole quiet lattice of questions about how the Bikini Bottom carceral system is actually organized that nobody on screen ever answers. It is the kind of detail the writers almost certainly included without much thought, a background choice to explain who Mrs. Puff is surrounded by, and yet once you notice it, it becomes another data point in the picture of a town with a large, elaborate, weirdly specific incarceration infrastructure. There is not just one jail. There are jails, plural, organized in ways that are hinted at but never mapped. We are going to find at least two more distinct detention facilities before the night is over, each with its own character, and this is the first hint that the prison side of Bikini Bottom is as sprawling and strange as the police side. But the thing I want you to carry out of this episode is its emotional core, because it is the key to Mrs. Puff for the rest of the series. After doing time, she is a character who has made a private peace with prison. It stops being a threat. In later episodes, when she is arrested again, she does not fight it the way you would expect a wrongly accused person to fight it. And part of the reason is that some piece of her has decided a cell is not the worst place she could be. That is a remarkable thing for a comedy to do to a supporting character, to let repeated injustice slowly reshape her relationship to her own freedom until confinement feels like rest. It would never phrase the idea that way. It just keeps putting her back in jail and letting her look a little more comfortable there each time, and the accumulation tells the story on its own. She was never a criminal. The system kept treating her like one until she stopped minding, and there is something in that surrender that is quietly one of the more human things in the whole series. Gather up the rest of her arrests and lay them side by side, and the sheer variety of pretexts becomes its own kind of comedy, because there is never a shortage of ways to put her in a cell. Take the episode Summer Job. In it, she is arrested for littering, and the specific act is that she tears up a note SpongeBob wrote and drops the pieces. That is the crime. She shredded a note and let it fall, and for that she is sentenced, and here is the part that turns the knife. She is sentenced to attend a prison driver's education class, taught by SpongeBob. Bikini Bottom decides that the correct punishment for a woman who drops some paper is to lock her in a room and force her to be taught driving by the exact student who has ruined her life. It is a sentence engineered for maximum irony, and everyone involved knows it because the whole point is that being near SpongeBob is the punishment, worse than any cell on its own. Then there is Bumper to Bumper, from the 9th season, one of the crueler ones if you stop to think about it, though it is played light. In this one, SpongeBob actually passes his boating test. He gets the license, the thing he has failed to earn dozens of times, and for a brief moment, it looks like the running gag might finally break. But then a police officer steps in and voids the whole thing, rips the license up, and the reason is not anything SpongeBob did. It is that Mrs. Puff violated her parole by crossing the county line, because she is a repeat offender, because she is technically on parole from her long history of arrests. Her presence taints the test, and so his license is destroyed, and she is hauled back to jail, vowing revenge on him as she goes. Sit with the logic of that for a moment. Her criminal record, which exists almost entirely because of him, now reaches out and cancels his one legitimate success, which then sends her back to prison, which deepens the record. It is a closed loop of misfortune, and the police are the mechanism that keeps it closing. The one that best captures the pure carelessness of the system is Patrick Mann. In this episode, Patrick appoints himself a superhero, a self-styled crime fighter, patrolling Bikini Bottom, and at one point, he accuses Mrs. Puff of a crime. The specifics involve a car and an accusation of theft or breaking in, but the mechanics of what follows are the thing to watch. The police arrest her on Patrick's word alone, a costume lunatic with no authority, no evidence, and no standing points at a woman, and says she is a criminal, and the officers take her in on that basis, while the actual victim in the situation is still trapped in the vehicle. No investigation, no questioning, no checking whether the accusation even makes sense. A vigilante says the word, and the machine engages, grabs the nearest plausible target, and hauls her off, ignoring the person who actually needs help right in front of them. It is the clearest possible demonstration that the Bikini Bottom police do not investigate crimes. They process accusations, and they will process one from a starfish in a homemade costume as readily as from anyone else. There are others. She is arrested in one episode for skipping jury duty, which is at least a real offense, and it is almost a relief to find one arrest with a legitimate legal basis, though even that is framed as another absurd interruption of her life, rather than a functioning system doing its job. She is jailed in Potato Puff for indirectly causing widespread destruction, which again traces back to being in the wrong place near the wrong chaos. She turns up charged or arrested in a scattering of other episodes, in an oral report she gives, in the endless traffic incidents that follow SpongeBob around. And the count, as I said, lands somewhere around 8, which is why I keep returning to the thought that she might be the most imprisoned character in the history of children's television, a mild-mannered driving instructor with a longer record than most of the series' actual villains. That last comparison is the one I want to leave you with before we move on from her, because it is plainly revealing about the priorities of this police force. Plankton, an actual criminal, a character whose entire purpose is to commit crimes, who schemes and steals and plots week after week, has been arrested roughly 5 times over the whole run. Mrs. Puff, who has never once committed a crime out of malice, who wants nothing more than to teach a boy to drive and be left alone, has been arrested around 8. She has been to jail more often than the town's resident supervillain. Let that settle for a second. The system that is supposed to protect the innocent and catch the guilty has, in her case, done the precise opposite more thoroughly for the innocent party than for the guilty one. And it is not because Mrs. Puff is secretly bad, it is because she is easy. She is present, she is compliant, she does not run, she does not scheme, and a lazy system will always prefer the target that does not resist over the one that does. Plankton fights back and slips away. Mrs. Puff stands there and takes it. And so the gentlest character in the series carries the heaviest record, and once you notice that, the whole running gag stops being quite so funny and starts to look like the sharpest joke it ever made about who actually ends up in cells. Now let me turn to the sentencing, because if the arrests in Bikini Bottom are absurd, the punishments handed down afterward climb to another level entirely, and the episode that proves it is a 5th season one called Good Ol' What's Name. This is a Squidward story, which is fitting, because Squidward is the designated sufferer, the character the universe seems built to torment, and this one delivers about as disproportionate an outcome as anyone endures across the whole run. The premise is small and petty in the way these premises love to be. There is a contest at the Krusty Krab, and to win it, Squidward needs to learn the name of a particular customer, a man he has served countless times, but whose name he has never bothered to learn. The customer will not simply tell him, so Squidward, desperate, fixated, needing that name, does something rash. He snatches the man's wallet, intending only to look at the identification inside and find out who he is. That is the whole crime. He grabbed a wallet to read a name off a card. He was not going to keep the money. He was not going to keep the wallet. He wanted a piece of information for a contest, but a police officer sees the grab, and a chase begins. It starts, in classic fashion, over something even smaller, a traffic matter, running a stop sign, and then it escalates into a pursuit for theft once the wallet is in the picture. Squidward runs, because of course he runs. Panic does the thinking, and by the time it is over, he is caught and hauled before the system, and the sentence handed down for grabbing a wallet to read a name is 10 years. 10 years in prison. When he finally does get to see the name on the license, it reads, in a perfect cruel punchline, Mr. What's It to Ya? Which is to say, what is it to you? Meaning he went to prison for a decade and did not even get the answer he ruined his life for. 10 years. I want to hold on that number, because it is one of the more staggering things ever done to a character in the name of a joke. In any functioning justice system, snatching a wallet with clear intent to return it, taking nothing, causing no lasting harm, would be a minor matter, a misdemeanor at absolute worst, more likely a stern word and a release. 10 years is the kind of sentence reserved in the real world for serious, violent, repeat felony. And Bikini Bottom hands it to a cashier for a moment of contest-fueled desperation. The punishment is so wildly out of proportion to the offense that it stops being a legal outcome and becomes something closer to sadism, a system that does not weigh crimes at all, but simply reaches for the harshest number available and applies it because it can. There is no sense that anyone considered the circumstances, the intent, the triviality of it. The wheels turned, and they ground Squidward down to a decade over a wallet. What makes it worse, and what I think is the real point buried in the gag, is that this is exactly the kind of case where a real justice system would show mercy or at least proportion, and Bikini Bottom shows neither. There is a contrast being drawn here, whether the writers meant it or not, between how the police treat the powerful and how they treat the ordinary. Squidward is nobody. He is a middle-aged cashier with no status, no wealth, no connections, no one to advocate for him. And the system, faced with a nobody who made a small mistake, throws the book at him with a force it never seems to muster for anything sincerely dangerous. Remember, this is the same police force that in other episodes cannot catch a serial strangler, cannot hold on to its prisoners, and cannot tell two children in rock costumes from actual rocks, but show them a cashier who grabbed a wallet, and suddenly they are efficient, decisive, and merciless. The competence is entirely selective. It appears only when the target is weak. And this is the thing that gets me about the disproportionate sentences, the thread that runs through Good Ol' What's Name and ties it to everything else tonight. The severity is never calibrated to the danger. It is calibrated to how little the accused can fight back. The people who receive the harshest treatment in Bikini Bottom are consistently the ones least able to resist it, the cashiers and the teachers and the earnest sponges, while the actual threats to the town, the schemers and the escape artists, cycle in and out of custody like it is a revolving door. A 10-year sentence for a wallet is not a sign of a tough-on-crime town. It is a sign of a town where punishment has come completely unmoored from justice, where the length of your sentence has nothing to do with what you did, and everything to do with whether anyone would notice or care what happened to you. Squidward went away for a decade because no one in Bikini Bottom would miss him enough to ask why. That is the joke, and it is also, if you hold it up to the light, one of the more pointed things a cartoon has ever said about how these systems actually decide who to crush. So far tonight, the theme has mostly been over-policing, the eagerness to arrest and punish the harmless. But there is an equal and opposite failure running right alongside it, and the episode that captures it best is a third season one called SpongeBob Meets the Strangler. This is the flip side of the coin, the story where the police do not do too much but far too little, where they let a genuine menace slip away and then abandon the very citizen who needs their protection, and it might be the sharpest portrait of the department's negligence in the whole series, because here, for once, there is a real threat. Not a party host, not a wallet grabber, not a paper tearer, an actual dangerous figure, and the police manage to lose him and then turn their backs on the person he is hunting. It begins with SpongeBob doing exactly what a good citizen is supposed to do. He witnesses someone littering, and he reports it. The someone is a large, menacing character known as the Tattletale Strangler, and thanks to SpongeBob telling on him, the Strangler is arrested. So far the system works, at least on the surface, though notice already the mismatch. This frightening figure is taken in for littering, the same trivial offense hung on everyone, rather than for anything commensurate with how dangerous he plainly is. But the arrest does not hold. The Strangler escapes almost immediately, and now he is loose in Bikini Bottom with a very specific grievance, which is SpongeBob, the tattletale who put him away. The threat is real, it is personal, and it is aimed at a named, identifiable citizen who did nothing but cooperate with the law. And this is where the police reveal exactly what they are worth when it counts. SpongeBob, frightened, goes to them for protection. He has a credible, escaped, threatening figure after him specifically because he helped them, and he asks for exactly what a police force exists to provide: safety from someone who wants to hurt him, and they refuse. They will not protect him. Worse than refuse, they mock him for it. They call him a tattletale. They belittle him for having reported the crime in the first place, and they abandon him to his fate. The institution that demands citizens report wrongdoing turns around and ridicules the one who did, then declines to lift a finger when that citizen is endangered as a direct result. It is a betrayal so complete that it loops past incompetence into something that feels almost like malice. The police treating cooperation as contemptible and protection as beneath them. Think about the message that sends inside the world of the story. SpongeBob followed the rules. He saw a crime and he reported it. The exact behavior a functioning police force wants to encourage. The whole social contract of law enforcement resting on citizens being willing to come forward. And his reward for doing the right thing is that the criminal comes after him, and the police laugh in his face. If you were any other resident of Bikini Bottom watching that unfold, what lesson would you take from it? You would learn, in the plainest way possible, never to report anything, never to cooperate, never to trust that the badge will have your back. Because the one time someone did the responsible thing, the system hung him out to dry and enjoyed doing it. The negligence here is not just a failure in one case. It actively teaches the whole town that the police are not on their side, and a force that has taught its citizens that lesson has stopped being a police force in any meaningful sense. The resolution, characteristically, does not come from the police doing their jobs. It comes from a mix of luck and SpongeBob's own accidental actions. The Strangler, having posed as SpongeBob's bodyguard in a scheme to get close to him, ends up undone not by any officer, but by the chaos SpongeBob generates just by being himself. And in the end, SpongeBob inadvertently drives the Strangler into a jail cell. And there is one final grace note, because the occupant already sitting inside that cell is Patrick, jailed for reasons the episode treats as barely worth explaining. One more citizen swept up by a system that jails the harmless as easily as it loses the dangerous. So the loop closes with a perfect little summary of the whole department. The real criminal ends up behind bars by accident, not by police work, and he ends up sharing the cell with an innocent who is already there for nothing. The guilty and the harmless in the same box, one placed there by chance and one by carelessness, and the police responsible for neither outcome in any way that reflects credit on them. What is unmistakably striking about SpongeBob Meets the Strangler, setting the comedy aside for a second, is how cleanly it inverts the over-policing episodes. In Party Pooper Pants and Good Ol' What's-His-Name, the failure is too much force aimed at the innocent. Here, the failure is too little force aimed at the guilty, and the refusal of the one basic duty of all, protecting a citizen in danger. And what connects them, what makes them the same failure wearing two different masks, is that in both cases the police act entirely according to their own comfort and their own whims, rather than any principle of justice. Arresting SpongeBob for a party is easy and satisfies a petty impulse, so they do it. Protecting SpongeBob from a strangler is hard and requires actual effort and courage, so they do not. The through line is not quite incompetence, and it is not quite malice. It is that the department only ever does what is easy and pleasing to itself, and justice, when it happens at all in Bikini Bottom, happens by accident, on the way to something the officers would rather be doing. I have been building a fairly dark picture, so let me pause on an episode that complicates it, because these stories are not always cruel about their police, and one of the earliest jail plots is actually the gentlest. It is a second season episode called Life of Crime, and it earns its place here precisely because it shows the department at its most harmless, almost sweet, which keeps me honest about what the canon really contains. The premise begins with SpongeBob and Patrick deciding to do something wild for once in their lives, to be daring, and the daring thing they land on is taking a balloon without paying for it. They borrow it, is how they think of it at first, with no intent to steal, but somewhere in their anxious little minds the act curdles into full-blown criminality, and they become convinced they are now thieves, hardened outlaws, wanted men. What follows is a small study in self-inflicted panic. The two of them, certain the entire town is hunting them, flee Bikini Bottom to live as fugitives. They hide out, they scavenge, they slowly fall apart under the weight of their imagined guilt, turning on each other the way SpongeBob and Patrick do when the pressure mounts, all over a single balloon that nobody is actually chasing them for. The comedy is entirely internal. There is no manhunt, there are no wanted posters. The crime exists almost entirely in their heads, inflated by their own conviction that they have crossed some terrible line, and eventually, unable to bear the guilt any longer, they do the honorable thing and turn themselves in. They march to the authorities and confess, ready to face justice for the great balloon heist. Here is where the episode turns unexpectedly kind. The police do briefly jail them, playing along with the seriousness the two have assigned to their crime, and for a moment, it looks like it might go the way these things usually go. Harmless idiots, crushed by an indifferent system. But then the twist lands, and it is a lovely one. It was National Free Balloon Day. The balloon was free the whole time. There was never any crime at all, because on that particular day, the balloons were being given away, and so SpongeBob and Patrick tormented themselves, fled their home, and turned themselves in over an act that was completely legal from the very first second. And rather than punish them for wasting everyone's time, the police release them, no harm done, and even give them lollipops on the way out. A small gesture of goodwill you almost never see from this department anywhere else. I include Life of Crime, partly out of fairness, and partly because the contrast it provides is surprisingly illuminating. This is Bikini Bottom law enforcement at its most benign, treating two frightened citizens with something like gentleness, letting them go with candy and no hard feelings. And the interesting question is, what makes this instance so different from all the others? Why the department that jails a man for a party and sends a cashier away for a decade here shrugs and hands out lollipops? I think the answer is telling. In Life of Crime, there is nothing for the police to gain by being harsh. SpongeBob and Patrick committed no crime, threatened no one, and offered no satisfying target for the exercise of power. There was no ego to soothe, no easy conviction to rack up, no pleasure to be taken in crushing them. So the officers simply do the easy, pleasant thing, which in this case happens to be kindness, because kindness costs them nothing here. That reading connects the episode back to the pattern rather than breaking it, which is why I trust it. The department in Bikini Bottom always does what is easiest and most gratifying to itself. Usually that means petty cruelty, because petty cruelty is easy and gratifying when you have unchecked power and bored officers. But every so often the easiest and most gratifying thing happens to be gentleness, and on those occasions, the same police who ruin lives elsewhere will hand you a lollipop and send you home. It is not that they hold principles that sometimes produce mercy, it is that they hold no principles at all. And mercy is simply what falls out when cruelty would take more effort than it is worth. The kindness in Life of Crime is real, and I do not want to sour it, because the episode is frankly warm, and it is one I would happily drift off to. But it is the kindness of a system with no compass, doing the nice thing by accident on a slow day, exactly as it does the terrible thing by accident on a busy one. There is one more small note in Life of Crime that strikes me as close to perfect, which is how it captures the way ordinary people relate to the law in this town. SpongeBob and Patrick did not flee because the police were after them. They fled because they had so thoroughly internalized the idea that the law is arbitrary and terrifying that they assumed the worst without any evidence at all. They live in a place where you can be jailed for a party, so of course they believed they could be jailed for a balloon. Their panic is not irrational inside the story's own logic. It is a completely reasonable response to a lifetime of watching this police force act without rhyme or reason. When the authorities around you punish at random, you learn to fear that anything might be a crime. And two harmless friends talk themselves into exile over a free balloon because, in this town, that is honestly the kind of thing that gets you thrown in a cell. The joke and the indictment are the same joke. They always are, here. The next episode I want to walk through is one of the darkest the series has ever aired, and it approaches the police from a completely different angle. Not through arrest or punishment, but through the way ordinary citizens react when they think they have done something the police will come for. It is the third season episode, Nasty Patty, and it is a small, dark comedy nightmare about a cover-up. The setup is that Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob become convinced that a health inspector who has come to the Krusty Krab is a fraud, an imposter there to scam them, so they decide to teach him a lesson. They serve him a booby-trapped patty, a deliberately disgusting one, and the plan goes horribly beyond what they intended. The inspector takes a bite, reacts badly, chokes, slips, hits his head, and collapses, motionless. And the two of them, staring at his still body, come to the worst possible conclusion. They believe they have killed him. It turns out he was a real inspector all along, not an imposter at all, which means, in their minds, they have just killed an innocent government official. What happens next is the meat of the episode, and it is a genuinely uncomfortable stretch of television for a children's show, because it plays as a straight-faced cover-up. Krabs and SpongeBob decide they cannot let anyone find out. They resolve to hide the body. They drag it around. They scheme about how to dispose of it. They sink deeper and deeper into the logic of two people trying to conceal a death from the law. And the tension is real, even as the jokes keep undercutting it. And then, at the worst possible moment, two police officers arrive. The rest of it becomes a nerve-wracking sequence of the two of them trying to keep the officers from discovering what they are certain is a corpse. Sweating through casual conversation, moving the body, praying the police do not look too closely, which, being Bikini Bottom Police, they largely do not. Let me note something about that dynamic, because it is easy to laugh past. The entire suspense of Nasty Patty depends on Krabs and SpongeBob assuming the absolute worst about what will happen if the police find out. They do not, for a second, consider explaining themselves. They do not think, "We made a terrible mistake, it was an accident, we should call for help and tell the truth." Their immediate, unquestioned reflex is that contact with the law means doom, that if the police learn what happened, they are finished. No explanation possible, no mercy available, no benefit of the doubt on offer. And that reflex, that total absence of any faith in due process, tells you everything about how the people of this town understand their own justice system. These are not hardened criminals. Mr. Krabs is greedy, but he is no murderer, and SpongeBob is about as innocent a creature as the sea contains. Yet the instant they believe a death has occurred, cover-up is not even a choice they weigh against honesty. It is simply the only option their world has taught them to see. That is the quiet horror underneath the comedy, and it connects directly to the Strangler episode we just discussed. In a town where the police mock the citizen who reports a crime, where they abandon the cooperative and crush the harmless, of course a person who stumbles into a genuine catastrophe will conclude that honesty is suicide. Krabs and SpongeBob are behaving rationally given everything we have seen about how this system treats people. They have watched officers jail the innocent for nothing and lose the guilty through carelessness. Why on earth would they trust that same force to fairly adjudicate an accidental death? Their panic and their cover-up are not signs that they are bad people. They are signs that they live under a system so arbitrary and so pitiless that concealing a body feels safer than telling the truth. And that is a truly bleak thing for a cartoon to imply, however brightly it is animated. The relief of the episode, and the reason it stays a comedy rather than tipping into actual tragedy, is that the inspector was never dead at all. He was only knocked out, and he revives, entirely fine, which means the whole harrowing cover-up was over nothing. Another Bikini Bottom crisis built entirely on a false premise, the same way Life of Crime was built on a crime that never happened. Nobody died, nobody was killed. The panic was as unfounded as the balloon heist. There is a pattern in that worth naming, because these stories return to it again and again. Ordinary residents convinced they are criminals when they are not, terrified of a police response to a crime that does not exist. The fear is the constant, whether or not the crime is real, and the fear is a product of the police, not the facts. This episode also matters for a smaller reason we will pick up later, which is that it is tied to the introduction of one of the very few named officers, part of the sparse roster of individual police, who actually have identities, rather than being anonymous background fish. Most of the officers we have met tonight are faceless, interchangeable, a uniform and a boat and nothing more, which is itself part of the point. An institution with no accountability tends to be an institution of no individuals, just the machine. But there are a handful of exceptions, a couple of officers the writers bothered to name, and one of them steps out of the crowd around this era of the series. I will come back to who she is, and why the decision to name so few of these police says something about how they are seen. For now, hold on to Nasty Patty as the episode that reveals the citizen's side of Bikini Bottom justice, the pure, immediate, learned terror of the law that makes ordinary decent characters behave like fugitives the moment they believe the police might come, because they have learned, correctly, that the police cannot be reasoned with. We have talked a great deal about the police, but the corruption of Bikini Bottom's justice does not stop at arrest. It follows you into the prison, and the world has more carceral detail built out than you might expect, including a properly nightmarish maximum security facility that gets its own episode. That episode is The Inmates of Summer, from the 5th season, and it takes us to a place called Inferno Island, the harshest and most fully realized prison in the entire series. If Bikini Bottom Jail is the ordinary holding facility, the place you go for a party you did not throw, or a wallet you should not have grabbed, Inferno Island is where the writers put their idea of real, hard, brutal incarceration, and the way it is designed tells you a lot about how this world thinks about punishment. The premise, as always, begins with an accident. SpongeBob and Patrick are trying to get to summer camp, and through the kind of mix-up these plots specialize in, they board the wrong vessel. Instead of a camp boat, they climb aboard a prisoner transport ship, and it carries them out to Inferno Island. And here's the piece of world building I find actually clever: the design of the prison itself. Inferno Island is exactly that, an island, set off the Bikini Bottom shipyards, surrounded on every side by water. Now, you might think that being underwater already, water is a strange thing to surround a prison with, but that is precisely the point. The prisoners cannot swim. The only way on or off the island is a single metal boat, and the whole facility is built around the fact that its inmates have no way to cross the open water back to shore. It is a deliberate, thought-through piece of carceral design, an escape-proof island whose walls are made of the sea itself, and I have always thought it one of the more inspired bits of setting these writers ever came up with. Running Inferno Island is a character simply called the Warden, and he is where the episode earns its darkness. The Warden is a tyrant. He abuses the inmates as a matter of routine, and crucially, he abuses his own guards as well, the two hapless officers named Barney and Bernie who work under him. That detail matters, because it extends the vision of corrupt authority all the way up the chain. It is not just that the powerful abuse the powerless in Bikini Bottom. It is that within the structure of authority itself, the ones slightly higher up abuse the ones slightly lower down, so that even the guards, the people ostensibly on the side of order, are victims of the man above them. The cruelty is not a matter of criminals versus enforcers. It is baked into the structure at every level, flowing downhill from whoever stands highest to whoever stands lowest, and the Warden sits at the top of the island, pouring it down on everyone beneath him. There is a piece of real-world trivia here that I love, and it deepens the whole thing. The Warden was voiced by R. Lee Ermey, the actor who became famous for playing the terrifying drill instructor in a well-known war film, a role built entirely on screaming abuse at recruits. Casting that specific voice as the Warden of Inferno Island is an inspired choice, because it imports all of that association, all that history of a man whose authority is expressed purely through cruelty and volume, straight into the character. Ermey brings a real edge to the role, and it is part of why the Warden lands as more plainly menacing than the usual comic villains. This is a performer who had made an icon out of the abuse of institutional power, dropped into a cartoon prison to do exactly that. It is the kind of casting that works on two levels at once: funny if you do not know the reference, and funnier and a little darker if you do. The escape attempt, when SpongeBob and Patrick finally try to get off the island, is pure Bikini Bottom. Faced with an escape-proof prison surrounded by water with only a metal boat for passage, they build themselves a boat out of cardboard. To cross open water, to escape an island whose entire security concept rests on the impossibility of crossing that water. The plan fails exactly as spectacularly as you would expect, the cardboard doing what cardboard does, and the two of them remain trapped, undone by the gap between their ambition and their materials. It is a comic beat, but it also quietly reinforces the design of the prison. Inferno Island works. Its security is not a joke. The one truly well-conceived, escape-proof piece of the entire Bikini Bottom justice system is its cruelest prison, which is its own dark little comment. The town cannot organize a fair arrest or hold on to a real criminal, but it has managed to build one truly inescapable dungeon, and it has staffed it with a tyrant. That contrast is the thing I want you to take from The Inmates of Summer, because it fits the larger pattern in a pointed way. Everywhere else in Bikini Bottom, the justice system is sloppy, lazy, careless, unable to do the basic work of distinguishing the guilty from the innocent. But where cruelty is concerned, where punishment for its own sake is the goal, the system suddenly becomes competent and thorough. Inferno Island is escape-proof. The warden is relentless. The suffering is efficient in a way nothing else in this world's law enforcement ever manages to be. And that tells you where the real energy goes. It cannot be bothered to investigate a crime or protect a citizen, but it will happily pour resources into an inescapable island and a tyrant to run it. The competence is there. It just only ever shows up in the service of punishment, never in the service of justice. And Inferno Island is the purest proof of that grim little priority the writers keep circling. If you asked me to point to the single episode that most concentrates the satire of absurd, unjust law enforcement into one sustained sequence, I would send you to a 6th season episode called Shuffleboarding, and I need to frame it carefully, because the twist is that the people doing the arresting here are not police at all. In this one, SpongeBob and Patrick are impersonating Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, the aged superheroes of the Bikini Bottom universe, retired crime fighters the two of them idolize. Dressed as their heroes and drunk on the fantasy of being crime fighters themselves, they take to the streets to enforce the law, and what follows is the bleakest parade of ludicrous arrests the series ever assembled. These are vigilantes, not sworn officers, and the writers know the difference, but the whole point of the sequence is that it is a direct satire of the town's policing, a mirror held up to how Bikini Bottom law enforcement actually behaves. And the crimes SpongeBob and Patrick decide to punish are the purest distillation of the whole thesis about arbitrary authority. They throw people in jail for the flimsiest imaginable offenses. Someone throws away a Krabby Patty, an act of wastefulness at worst, and they are hauled off as a criminal. Someone chews gum too loudly, and the loud chewing is treated as a jailable offense. Someone has a shoe untied, and the untied shoe is grounds for arrest. Someone is, and this is my favorite, simply too old, and being too old is enough to get you locked up. This is the montage fans point to as the definitive statement of Bikini Bottom's absurd law enforcement priorities. A rapid-fire sequence of ordinary people snatched off the street for things that are not crimes in any conceivable legal system, delivered with the total confidence of authority that has never once been questioned. Now, the clever thing about routing this through vigilantes rather than actual police is that it lets the writers say the quiet part out loud, without technically indicting the real department. SpongeBob and Patrick are not corrupt cops. They are two well-meaning idiots, playing dress-up, doing what they imagine crime fighters do. But that is exactly what makes the sequence such sharp satire, because their idea of what crime fighting looks like, the mental model they are working from, is drawn entirely from the world they live in. When SpongeBob pictures enforcing the law, this is what he imagines: arresting people for loud gum and untied shoes, and being too old, because that is the kind of policing he has watched his whole life. The absurd arrests in Shuffleboarding are a portrait of how the town's citizens have come to understand law enforcement, and the portrait is devastating precisely because it is so casually accurate to everything else we have seen. SpongeBob is not inventing a cruel fantasy. He is imitating the real thing. There is a version of this episode that would just be silly. A couple of characters in costumes doing dumb stuff, and if you watch it without the rest of the series in mind, that is probably all you would see. But sitting where we are tonight, Having gone through the party arrest and the 10-year wallet sentence and the recurring littering charges, shuffleboarding reads as something closer to a thesis statement. It gathers every scattered absurd arrest ever done and packs them into one sequence, and by putting them in the hands of two obvious fools, it makes the point that this style of policing is foolish wherever it comes from. The badge does not make it less ridiculous. When the real officers arrest a man for not inviting them to a party, it is the same act, morally, as SpongeBob arresting a stranger for chewing gum. The only difference is that the real officers have the authority to make it stick, and this episode strips that difference away to show you the pure absurdity underneath. What sincerely delights me about it is how completely SpongeBob and Patrick believe in what they are doing. They are not being malicious. They think they are heroes. They think they are cleaning up the streets, protecting the good people of Bikini Bottom from the menace of the improperly shod and the excessively elderly. Their conviction is total and totally unearned, and that combination, sincere belief plus zero judgment plus a costume that grants the appearance of authority, is exactly the recipe these stories keep identifying as the danger. It is the hall monitor sash from the very first season grown up into a superhero costume. Give a person who cannot be trusted with power even the look of it, and they will immediately start locking up their neighbors for nothing, fully convinced they are doing good. The real police of Bikini Bottom are that impulse with a budget and a fleet of helicopters. SpongeBob and Patrick are that impulse with cardboard and delusion, and the two turn out to look almost exactly alike. The other thing this episode quietly confirms is that the people of Bikini Bottom have no defense against any of it, whether it comes from the real police or from two lunatics in costumes. The ones being arrested for their untied shoes do not argue their way out of it. They do not demand to see a warrant or a charge or any authority at all. They submit, the way SpongeBob submitted in Party Pooper Pants, the way Mrs. Puff stopped resisting somewhere along her string of arrests. The town has been so thoroughly conditioned to accept arbitrary detention that it does not even check whether the people doing the detaining are real officers. A costume is enough. The look of authority is enough. And a population that has stopped asking whether their arrest is legitimate is a population that has already lost, long before two fools in hero suits ever showed up to prove it. Let me turn now to the one character in Bikini Bottom who is actually, reliably a criminal, because the way the police handle him is its own study in dysfunction. Plankton is the resident villain, the tiny green owner of the failing chum bucket, whose entire life is organized around a single obsessive goal: stealing the Krabby Patty secret formula from Mr. Krabs. He schemes constantly. He commits real crimes. He is by any measure the closest thing the town has to a real threat, and yet across the whole series he has only been arrested something like 5 times. That number alone is worth pausing on, because it means the town's actual supervillain, the one being who unmistakably and repeatedly tries to break the law, ends up in custody less often than a driving instructor. The police, so eager to jail the harmless, are strangely bad at holding on to the one resident who actually deserves it. Before I get to the episodes, I have to clear up a piece of canon that matters enormously to all of this, because it is the engine underneath every Plankton crime plot. In the television series, Plankton has never permanently stolen the Krabby Patty formula. He has gotten his hands on it briefly, a few times, held it for a moment, but he never keeps it, never reads and retains it, never actually wins. In the films he takes it temporarily, but even there it always comes back. This is a fixed rule of the universe, and it is worth not misremembering, because the whole reason the police keep getting pulled into his schemes is that the formula is the treasure that generates all the crime. It is the thing being stolen, the evidence being seized, the object every scheme revolves around. And because Plankton never actually succeeds, the crimes reset forever. An endless loop of attempt and arrest and escape and attempt again, which is part of why the town's justice system never develops any real ability to deal with him. He is a permanent problem that never resolves, and the police treat him accordingly, as a nuisance to be cycled through custody rather than a threat to be stopped. The first time we actually see Plankton behind bars is a 6th season episode called Krabby Road, and the sentence he receives there belongs in the Hall of Fame of absurd Bikini Bottom punishments, right alongside Squidward's Decade for a Wallet. In this one, Plankton forms a band called Plankton and the Patty Stealers as a scheme to trick the formula out of SpongeBob. The plan fails, as his plans always fail, and he lands in Bikini Bottom jail. There is a nice little beat where a cop is showing a new recruit around and points out Plankton's cell, treating him as a fixture, a known quantity, part of the furniture of the place. Plankton escapes, because of course he does, and when he is recaptured, the sentence handed down is that he must practice with the band for 22 years. 22 years of forced musical practice. It is punishment as pure absurdity again, a number plucked from nowhere and attached to a crime in a way that has no relationship to anything, and it fits the pattern we have watched all night, where Bikini Bottom sentences have nothing to do with justice and everything to do with whatever strange whim the moment produces. Then there is Jailbreak, a 9th season episode that contains what might be my favorite single image of police incompetence in the entire run. Plankton, imprisoned again, teams up with his fellow inmates to break out and, naturally, make another run at the formula. Mr. Krabs, worried, hires SpongeBob to guard Plankton every weekend, which is already a strange privatization of the prison system, the wealthy business owner paying a fry cook to personally supervise an inmate. The prisoners do escape, and there is chaos, and it is all eventually resolved, but the detail that makes the episode is where Mr. Krabs was keeping the police the whole time. He had hidden the entire Bikini Bottom police force inside his safe, the whole force. Every officer, tucked away in a vault like a stack of dollar bills, to be produced when convenient. And that image, the cops as objects a rich man can literally store in his safe and take out when he needs them, is maybe the tidiest statement anyone ever made about who the police in this town actually work for. They are not a public institution serving the citizens. They are an asset, a possession, something Mr. Krabs can pocket and deploy, and it is put almost literally on screen. I keep circling back to that safe, because it recurs across the imagination of confinement here, and it ties a lot of threads together. Plankton, being tiny, is often held not in a normal cell, but in a safe, a small vault, used as an extremely small prison, and there is even a facility referenced in the world, called the Institution for the Criminally Tiny, a jail built specifically for miniature criminals at Plankton's scale. So you have a whole layered infrastructure of confinement, the ordinary Bikini Bottom jail, the escape-proof Inferno Island we visited earlier, and then this specialized micro-prison for the very small, plus the ad hoc use of safes as cells. Bikini Bottom has thought harder about how to lock people up than about almost anything else in its civic life. And Mr. Krabs, storing both his money and, when it suits him, the actual police force in a safe of his own, sits at the center of that motif like a punchline. In this town, prison and property blur together. The safe holds your valuables and your prisoners and, if you are rich enough, your police, all in the same box. What all of this says about Plankton's relationship to the law is surprisingly a little sad underneath the comedy, and it is a different sadness than Mrs. Puff's. She is the innocent the system crushes. He is the guilty party the system cannot be bothered to actually stop, cycling him through cells and absurd sentences and safes without ever addressing the fact that he will simply try again the moment he is out. The police treat Plankton as entertainment, as a recurring gag, as a known character to point out to new recruits, never as a problem to solve, because solving problems is not what this force does. He mentions being on parole in one episode. He is stored in safes. He is sentenced to decades of band practice, and none of it changes anything, because the system has no interest in outcomes. It only has an interest in the performance of punishment. And so the one genuine criminal in Bikini Bottom is, in his own way, as failed by its justice system as the innocents are, just from the other direction, a villain the town cannot reform, cannot contain, and cannot stop, because it was never really trying to do any of those things in the first place. The episode that ties the Plankton material and the police material together most completely comes much later in the run, in the 11th season, and it is called, fittingly, Call the Cops. This one is worth the full walkthrough because it manages to hit almost every note we have been sounding tonight in a single half hour. The incompetence, the absurd arrests, the way the formula generates crime, and the astonishing ease with which anyone can impersonate the police. It begins with Plankton being arrested, another entry in his long record. But this time, there is a complication that sets the whole plot spinning. When the police take Plankton in, they also take the Krabby Patty secret formula, because it is bound up in the crime, and they hold it as evidence. The formula, that most prized and closely guarded object in all of Bikini Bottom, is now sitting in police custody. This terrifies Mr. Krabs, rightly, because if there is one thing these episodes have established beyond any doubt, it is that the Bikini Bottom Police cannot be trusted to keep hold of anything. They lose criminals, they lose prisoners. The idea of them safeguarding the one secret that matters most in the sea is a genuine nightmare for Krabs, and so he and SpongeBob hatch a plan to get it back, and the plan is the thing that makes the episode. They decide to impersonate police officers. They put on the uniforms, they adopt the manner, and they walk into the situation pretending to be cops. And the astonishing thing, though by now it should not astonish us at all, is how easily it works. Nobody stops them. Nobody checks. A uniform is, once again, all anyone requires, exactly as it was for SpongeBob and Patrick in their superhero costumes. In Bikini Bottom, a uniform is not a credential backed by an institution. It is a costume that grants power to whoever puts it on, no questions asked. While they are running around as fake officers, the episode delivers the gag everyone remembers, and it is a beautiful piece of satire because it turns the whole absurd arrest formula on its head. SpongeBob, playing cop, arrests a little girl for selling cookies without a license. It is the platonic absurd Bikini Bottom arrest, a child engaged in about as wholesome an activity as exists, hauled in for a licensing technicality, the exact kind of petty nonsense the police in this town specialize in. Except this time, when they get her back to the station, they discover that the little girl selling cookies is, in fact, a frankly notorious criminal, a wanted figure the real police have presumably been failing to catch. The one time an arrest looks completely absurd, it turns out to be accidentally, hilariously correct. SpongeBob, playing at being a cop and doing the dumbest version of it, stumbles into catching an actual criminal the professionals never managed to bring in. I love that gag on a couple of levels, and it is worth teasing apart why it works, because it is doing something cleverer than it looks. On the surface, it is a simple reversal, the absurd arrest that turns out to be justified. But underneath, it is making a sharp point about the police in this town. The real officers, with all their training and equipment and authority, could not catch this notorious criminal. It took SpongeBob, an amateur in a borrowed uniform arresting people for imaginary crimes, to accidentally do it, and he only did it because his standards for what counts as a crime are so low that a child selling cookies met them. In other words, the only way anyone in Bikini Bottom ever catches a real criminal is by casting such a ridiculously wide net of absurd arrests that a genuine offender occasionally gets swept up by chance. It is not police work, it is a broken clock being right, and it is framed exactly that way, a triumph that is really just luck dressed up as competence. The episode escalates, as these things do, until essentially everyone ends up in jail. Krabs, Plankton, Patrick, SpongeBob, the whole tangle of them, all swept into the same collapsing situation, the formula bouncing between hands, the fake cops and the real cops and the criminals, all blurring together until the cell doors close on the lot of them. That ending, the whole cast crammed into jail together, is almost a thesis image for the entire series' vision of its justice system. There is no clean line between the police, the criminals, and the ordinary citizens in Bikini Bottom. Everyone is a cop when they put on the costume. Everyone is a criminal when the whims of the system decide they are. And everyone ends up in the same cell eventually. The categories are not stable. They are just roles you rotate through depending on what you are wearing and what mood the arbitrary machinery is in that day. What Call the Cops crystallizes, more than any other single episode, is the total absence of institutional integrity in Bikini Bottom law enforcement. The police cannot safeguard evidence. They cannot verify the identity of their own officers. They cannot catch a notorious criminal through actual investigation, managing it only by accident through an imposter's dumb luck. And a uniform, the very symbol of their authority, turns out to be a thing anyone can put on to seize power over their neighbors. Strip all the jokes away, and what you have is a portrait of a police force that is not really an institution at all, just a set of costumes and vehicles and cells that anyone can operate, pointed at whoever happens to draw attention, securing nothing and protecting no one. It is the funniest and also the bleakest of these episodes, because it does not even give you the comfort of a competent villain or a competent hero. It just gives you the machinery, spinning freely, with no one at the wheel and everyone liable to end up behind bars. There is one episode that shifts the police satire onto more overtly political ground, and it deserves its own stretch because it is the clearest case of the department being used, not for petty ego or lazy convenience, but as a tool to silence dissent. The episode is SpongeBob's Last Stand, a 7th season special that aired around Earth Day, and it casts SpongeBob and Patrick as protesters. The threat they are protesting is a plan to build a highway straight through jellyfish fields, the natural area SpongeBob loves, the meadow where he goes to catch jellyfish, a place of genuine meaning to him. The highway would pave over all of it, and so the two of them stand in its path and refuse to move, staging a peaceful protest against the development, singing and holding their ground to stop the bulldozers. Now, in a functioning system, peaceful protest against a development project is a protected act, the kind of thing law enforcement is supposed to allow, even when it is inconvenient to the powerful. But in Bikini Bottom, when the protest becomes an obstacle to the highway, the police move in to break it up, and the pretext they use to arrest SpongeBob is the detail that gives the whole episode its edge. They arrest him on the grounds that his sitar, the instrument he has been playing during the protest, does not have a license. That is the charge, an unlicensed sitar. It is transparently a fabrication, a bureaucratic nothing dredged up to justify removing an inconvenient protester, and everyone watching understands that the sitar license is not the real reason. The real reason is that SpongeBob is standing in the way of a project the powerful want built, and the police are there to clear him out of the way, dressing up the removal of a dissenter as the enforcement of some absurd instrument licensing regulation. And then, having arrested the two of them on this trumped-up charge, the police do not even bother to properly jail them. They dump them in the middle of nowhere, far from town, out of the way, so they cannot return to the protest site and interfere with the highway again. This is the part that pushes the episode past the usual pettiness into something that looks a lot like straightforward political repression. The goal is not justice, not public safety, not even the ego-soothing of the party arrest. The goal is to physically remove a citizen who is exercising a right, to get him away from the thing he is trying to protect, and to do it under cover of a bogus legal pretext. The writers are drawing, whether they mean to or not, a very recognizable picture of how police power gets used to protect development and moneyed interests against the ordinary people standing in their way, and they are doing it in a cartoon aimed at children. What makes SpongeBob's Last Stand land as more than another gag is that SpongeBob is unambiguously in the right here. This is not one of the episodes where his own foolishness causes the chaos, like the hall monitor mess or the balloon panic. He is protecting a real place from real destruction, standing up for something seriously worth defending, doing it peacefully, and the police side entirely with the developers against him. There is no ambiguity about who the good guy is, and the police are not it. In most of the cases we have discussed, they are absurd, or negligent, or petty. But you can read their failures as a kind of dumb, motiveless chaos. Here the failure has a direction. It has a beneficiary. The highway project benefits from SpongeBob's removal, and the police act, knowingly or not, as its enforcement arm, which is a sharper and more pointed kind of corruption than mere incompetence. I want to be careful not to overstate this, because it is still a comedy and it resolves in a comedic way, with SpongeBob and Patrick eventually finding their way back, and the day being saved through the usual cartoon means, rather than through any legal vindication. The police are not depicted as a serious, coordinated political force, but the shape of the episode is unmistakable, and it is different enough from the others to be worth marking. The unlicensed sitar arrest is a perfect little specimen of a very specific genre, the fabricated charge, the pretextual nonsense that real authorities have historically used to remove inconvenient people, and the writers reach for it with a knowingness that suggests they understood exactly what they were satirizing. This is not a police force absent-mindedly jailing an innocent. This is a police force deployed, deliberately, to make a problem for the powerful go away, and the license was never anything but the excuse. Placed alongside everything else tonight, SpongeBob's Last Stand completes the range of the vision of these police, because it fills in the one register the other episodes leave out. We have seen them as petty ego, as lazy negligence, as absurd whim, as a possession of the wealthy. Here we see them as an instrument of power against the powerless in the bluntest sense, clearing a peaceful protester off land the developers want. And the fact that the series can move so fluidly between these modes, from the harmless lollipops of Life of Crime to the pretextual arrests of this episode, without ever feeling inconsistent, is a sign of how coherent its underlying idea actually is. The police in Bikini Bottom serve whatever is easiest and most advantageous to whoever holds real power in a given moment. Sometimes that is their own bruised feelings. Sometimes it is a rich crab's convenience. And sometimes, as here, it is a development project that needs a meadow cleared and a protester silenced, and the badge is happy to oblige. If you want to understand just how high the stakes of crime and punishment can climb in this universe, you have to leave the television series for a moment and go to the first film, the theatrical release from 2004, because it establishes something about Bikini Bottom justice that the series only rarely lets you glimpse. The plot hinges on Plankton's master scheme, the one he calls Plan Z, and it is his most elaborate and nearly his most successful. The plan is to steal King Neptune's crown, ship it far away to a place called Shell City, and, crucially, to frame Mr. Krabs for the theft. And the reason framing Krabs matters so much, the reason it is such a devastating move, is what the punishment for that particular crime turns out to be. Stealing the king's crown is not a jailable offense in Bikini Bottom. It is a capital offense. The penalty is execution. Let that register, because it changes the whole texture of everything we have been discussing. We have spent the night talking about jail, about cells and sentences and prisons, treating incarceration as the worst the system can do. But the film reveals that Bikini Bottom has capital punishment, that its justice can and will kill you for the right crime, and it nearly does exactly that on screen. When Neptune believes Krabs stole his crown, he moves to execute him, and there is a genuinely tense sequence where Krabs is about to be fried, his shell heating up, the king's power poised to end him for a crime he did not commit. He is saved, of course. This is still a family film. But the premise is never walked back. The stakes were real within the story. The punishment for crown theft is death, and an innocent Mr. Krabs came within moments of suffering it because Plankton pointed the finger at him, and the highest power in the sea was ready to kill on that accusation alone. Notice how perfectly that fits the pattern we have traced through the television episodes. What almost kills Mr. Krabs is not evidence. It is an accusation, taken at face value, acted on immediately, with no investigation, exactly like Mrs. Puff arrested on Patrick's word, exactly like the citizens jailed on a whim. The only difference is the scale of the consequence. In the series, a baseless accusation gets you a cell. In the film, a baseless accusation from the right schemer gets you the executioner. The underlying failure is identical, a justice system that does not test claims, that reaches for the harshest available response, that punishes first and never asks whether it has the right party. Plankton understood that about his own world well enough to build his entire master plan around it. He knew that if he simply accused Krabs, the system would do the rest, would move straight to killing an innocent crab without pausing to check, and he was very nearly right. And then there is what Plankton does once Krabs is frozen and out of the way, because it contains the sharpest indictment of the police in the entire franchise, and it works precisely because of what the police do not do. With Krabs neutralized and the formula finally in his grasp, Plankton opens up chum restaurants and hands out bucket helmets across the town, and the helmets let him mind control the entire population. This is not a petty crime. This is a total takeover, the enslavement of every resident of the city, the complete collapse of civic freedom, one villain seizing control of every mind in Bikini Bottom. It is the single largest crime ever committed across the whole franchise, an actual conquest, and it raises an obvious question the film answers by simply letting it hang there. Where are the police? What does the enormous, well-equipped Bikini Bottom Police Department, with all its cars and planes and helicopters and SWAT teams, do while the town is being conquered and enslaved before their eyes? Nothing. They do nothing. The great crime of the whole franchise, the one moment when Bikini Bottom truly needs protecting, the one time all that equipment and manpower would actually be justified, is the exact moment the police are completely absent and useless. The town falls to Plankton without any meaningful resistance from its own law enforcement, and it is left to SpongeBob, a fry cook, to travel to Shell City, recover the crown, return, and break the mind control himself. The salvation of the entire town comes from a sponge with a heart, not from a single one of its officers. And that absence, at the moment of greatest need, is the whole thesis about these police, delivered in its purest and largest form. All that apparatus, all that force, all those specialized units and vehicles, and when a real threat finally materializes, when the town faces genuine conquest, the police contribute nothing at all. They are there for the parties they were not invited to, and the wallets grabbed for a name. They are nowhere for the actual apocalypse. Only at the very end, after SpongeBob has already saved everyone, does the system reassert itself to finally arrest Plankton, who is dragged away shouting that he will destroy them all. And the timing of that arrest is the perfect, grim little button on the whole thing. The police show up to make the arrest after the danger has passed, after a civilian has already done all the real work, after the town has already been saved by someone else. They arrive to take the credit and close the case, contributing their arrest only once it costs them nothing and risks nothing, once the hard and frightening part is safely over. It is the department in miniature, or rather in maximum, showing up for the easy, satisfying, safe conclusion and being utterly absent for the difficult, dangerous middle. The film gives the Bikini Bottom Police their biggest possible stage, a citywide catastrophe, and their contribution to it is to be missing when it matters and present when it does not, which is, when you think about it, exactly what they have been doing at small scale in every episode we have discussed tonight. I have been talking about the police all night as a kind of faceless machine, and that is deliberate because it is largely how they are presented, but it is worth stopping to look at the handful of officers who actually have names, because the decision to individuate so few of them says something in itself. By and large, the police of Bikini Bottom are anonymous. They are background fish in uniforms, interchangeable, a boat and a hat and a voice, never developed into people. You almost never learn an officer's name, almost never get a sense of a personality or a history behind the badge. And that anonymity is not just a production shortcut. It is thematically of a piece with everything we have discussed, because an institution with no accountability tends to be an institution of no individuals. When no one is ever held responsible for anything, there is no reason for anyone to have a name. The uniform is the whole identity. The badge is the entire self. But there are exceptions, and the most significant is an officer named Nancy. Officer Nancy is the closest thing to a recurring, identifiable police character, a lavender, jelly bean-shaped fish, one of the reused incidental character designs. Her situation is a little tangled, in a way that is very SpongeBob, because she goes by more than one name depending on the episode. In some appearances she is called Officer Nancy, and in at least one she is referred to as O'Malley, so even the best established individual officer does not have a stable identity, which somehow feels appropriate for this department. She often turns up alongside a partner, another incidental officer, and she is behind several of the petty and abusive arrests we have talked about. She is, in a sense, the face put on Bikini Bottom policing on the rare occasions it gets a face at all, and it is telling that the face belongs to some of the pettier exercises of the power. There is also an officer sometimes named John, a male officer who appears across various episodes, though he is even more thinly sketched than Nancy, and beyond those two, the named roster gets murky fast. Various fan encyclopedias and wikis list other supposed officers, cops with names attached, but many of these are so minor, so one-off, or so poorly documented that I would not want to state them as solid canon, and the research I trust flags them as uncertain, so I will not build much on them. What matters is the shape of the thing. Out of an entire police force, out of all those cars and helicopters and specialized units, the writers have bothered to give durable names to a mere handful of officers, and even the best documented of them cannot keep her name straight from one episode to the next. That is not simply an accident of a busy writing room. It reflects how these police are seen, as a mass, a uniform-shaped force of nature, rather than a collection of accountable individuals. Compare that to how carefully the criminals and the victims get named and developed. Plankton has a rich, detailed personality, a backstory, a wife who is a computer, a whole interior life of scheming and resentment. Mrs. Puff is a fully realized character, with fears and desires, and a slowly evolving relationship to her own imprisonment. The tattletale Strangler, the warden, even minor villains get names and traits and specificity, but the police, the enforcers of the whole system, remain a blur. And I think that contrast is doing real work, whether the writers consciously intended it or not. Identity gets lavished on the people caught up in the justice system, the accused and the punished and the pursued, while the punishers themselves stay an undifferentiated mass. It is much easier to abuse power when you are not a person, when you are just the uniform, when no name will ever be attached to what you did. The anonymity of these officers is not just a stylistic choice, it is, Read one way, the visual grammar of unaccountability. There is a real-world dimension to these incidental characters that I find honestly charming, and it is worth a brief mention because it explains why a figure like Officer Nancy exists at all. SpongeBob has always relied on a large stable of reusable background character designs, the incidental fish, generic townspeople who get recolored and reused endlessly to fill out crowds and take on minor speaking roles as needed. Officer Nancy is one of these designs pressed into police service, which is part of why her identity is so loose, because she was never conceived as a single fixed character, so much as a useful body to put in a police hat when an episode needed an officer with a line or two. And that production reality dovetails perfectly with the theme. The Bikini Bottom Police are, quite literally, generic townspeople in uniforms, the same anonymous fish, who fill out every crowd, temporarily handed the power to arrest their neighbors. The person writing you a ticket today was a face in the background yesterday, and will be again tomorrow. The badge is a costume handed out to whichever spare fish an episode needs. That detail, small as it is, might be the truest thing about how these police are imagined, and it circles back to the imposter gags we discussed, the superhero costumes and the fake uniforms. If the real officers are just recolored background fish in hats, then of course a couple of imposters in the same hats can pass for police without anyone noticing. There was never a meaningful difference to begin with. The whole force is, at the level of design and at the level of theme, a set of ordinary citizens who happen to be wearing the uniform this week, granted enormous power over everyone else, and held to account by no one. And when SpongeBob puts on that same uniform in Call the Cops, or the same kind of costume in Shuffleboarding, he is not really impersonating anything. He is just joining the ranks, doing exactly what the actual police do, indistinguishable from them, because there was never much to distinguish. The anonymity of the Bikini Bottom Police and the ease of impersonating them are the same fact seen from two directions, and both point at a force that is less an institution than a wardrobe. I want to come back to the roads, because when you tally up all the arrests, an enormous share of them trace to a single source, the boating test, and everything that flows from it, and it is worth understanding why the traffic system of Bikini Bottom functions as a kind of crime factory feeding the jails. We have already seen how SpongeBob's inability to keep a license drives Mrs. Puff to prison again and again, but there is an episode that widens the lens and shows how absurd the whole licensing apparatus is, even when he is not the one behind the wheel. It is a 4th season episode called Driven to Tears, and it takes the running boating school gag and turns it into a story about how arbitrary the town's relationship to its own traffic laws really is. The premise is that Patrick, on a whim, takes the boating test and passes it. Patrick, who has never studied, who applies himself to nothing, casually passes the exact exam SpongeBob has failed dozens of times, and the insult is heightened by making Patrick the millionth person to pass, which earns him a celebrity's welcome, a whole fanfare of congratulation for an accomplishment he stumbled into without effort. Meanwhile, SpongeBob, who wants a license more than anything, who has tried and failed something like 58 times by this point, is left humiliated, watching his best friend receive adulation for the thing he himself cannot achieve no matter how hard he works. It is a sharp little portrait of how meaningless the licensing system is, that it can be passed on a whim by someone who does not care and denied forever to someone who cares desperately. What happens next is where the police come back in. Patrick, now licensed but with no understanding of or respect for the rules of the road, drives recklessly, flouting traffic laws, treating his new license as permission to do whatever he wants, and SpongeBob, appalled at his friend's disregard for the laws he himself reveres, takes matters into his own hands and rips up Patrick's license, which then triggers the usual machinery, because now both of them are in the wrong in the eyes of the system, and the police end up chasing them both, with Bikini Bottom Jail hanging over the whole thing as the destination. Two friends, one who cannot get a license and one who does not deserve one, both ending up pursued by the law, is a neat encapsulation of how the traffic system in this town produces criminals almost automatically, catching the earnest and the careless alike in the same net. The thing Driven to Tears clarifies is that the boating test is not really a safety mechanism at all. In a functioning world, a driving test exists to keep dangerous drivers off the road and let safe ones on. But in Bikini Bottom, the test does the opposite. It passes Patrick, who is a menace, on a lark, and it fails SpongeBob, who is at least trying, over and over for years. The relationship between the test and actual competence is non-existent, And because the test is arbitrary, everything downstream of it is arbitrary too. The licenses and the tickets and the arrests and the jailings, all resting on a foundation, with no connection to whether anyone can actually drive safely. The whole apparatus generates paperwork and punishment and prison sentences, Mrs. Puff's especially, without ever accomplishing the one thing it ostensibly exists to accomplish, which is safer roads. It is bureaucracy as pure ritual, punishment detached from any purpose. And that detachment is the heart of why the roads produce so many arrests. Every element of the driving system in Bikini Bottom is calibrated to create infractions rather than prevent harm. The test is impossible for the sincere and trivial for the reckless. The licenses are destroyed the moment they are issued. The tickets rain down for the pettiest violations, while genuine road menaces like Patrick sail through celebrated. And presiding over all of it is a police force that treats every traffic matter as an opportunity for an arrest rather than a problem to be actually solved. Mrs. Puff's whole tragedy grows out of this. The endless cycle of a student who cannot pass, and a system that punishes his teacher for it, and, driven to tears, shows that the dysfunction is not specific to SpongeBob. It is baked into the roads themselves. The town has built a traffic system that manufactures offenders, and then it acts shocked every single time that there are so many offenders to arrest. There is a smaller companion gag to all of this that I find actually telling, which is how many of the jokes about the roads end with someone crashing into a police vehicle specifically. Mrs. Puff, in her foundational arrest, crashes the stolen boat into a police boat. The collisions in these episodes have a way of finding the police, of turning an ordinary accident into a direct offense against law enforcement, which of course escalates the consequences. It is as though the police in Bikini Bottom are always positioned right in the path of the chaos their broken system generates, ready to be crashed into, ready to convert a fender bender into a jailing. And that image, the police boat sitting there waiting to be hit so an arrest can follow, is a fitting emblem for the whole traffic apparatus. It exists less to prevent collisions than to be present for them, to be the thing you crash into on your way to a cell. The system was always going to find a reason to put you in. To really understand Bikini Bottom's dysfunction, it helps to look at the one time we get taken to a different city entirely, because the contrast is illuminating, and it turns out the neighbors are not doing any better. The episode is the 5th season special, sometimes called Whatever Happened to SpongeBob, also known by the title Who Bob What Pants, and it sends an amnesiac SpongeBob wandering out of Bikini Bottom and into a place called New Kelp City. He has lost his memory, he does not know who he is, and he stumbles into this neighboring town as a blank slate, which makes him the perfect eyes for the audience to see a different corner of this underwater world through. And what he finds in New Kelp City is a place with its own absurd law and its own broken idea of enforcement, a dark mirror of the town he came from. In New Kelp City, bubble blowing has been outlawed. Blowing bubbles, that most innocent and joyful of SpongeBob's signature activities, the thing he does for pure delight, is illegal there, banned outright. And the ban is not even enforced by anything resembling official police. It is enforced by a street gang called the Bubble Poppin' Boys, a group that has taken it upon themselves to violently suppress bubble blowing throughout the city, terrorizing anyone who dares to blow one. So here is a whole city that has outlawed a harmless act of happiness and handed the enforcement of that law over to a gang of thugs. The official structure has either collapsed or abdicated, and into the vacuum has stepped organized intimidation, a private violent force policing an absurd prohibition. It is a different flavor of the same rot we have seen in Bikini Bottom, dysfunction in a slightly different key. SpongeBob, being SpongeBob, blows a bubble, because he does not know it is illegal and because bubbles are simply what he is, and this brings the Bubble Poppin' Boys down on him. But instead of being crushed, he ends up standing up to them and driving them out of the city, freeing New Kelp City from their reign of bubble terror, and in gratitude the city makes him mayor. There is something lovely and pointed in that resolution, that a place so broken it had criminalized joy and surrendered to a gang could be set right by one earnest stranger, who simply refused to accept that bubbles were a crime. But the part I want to draw out is the diagnosis offered by showing us this second city at all. Because the lesson of New Kelp City is not that Bikini Bottom is uniquely bad. The lesson is that this whole underwater world runs on absurd laws and broken enforcement. That the dysfunction is regional, systemic, everywhere you look beneath the waves. Think about what it means that the neighboring city's version of law enforcement is a street gang enforcing a ban on bubbles. It suggests that the difference between the official Bikini Bottom Police and an outright criminal gang is not as large as you would hope. Both enforce absurd prohibitions. Both use their power to terrorize ordinary people over harmless acts. Both operate without any real accountability or connection to justice. The Bubble Poppin' Boys are just the honest version, a gang that does not bother pretending to be a legitimate institution, while the Bikini Bottom Police wear the uniforms and drive the official boats but behave, much of the time, in fundamentally the same way. When SpongeBob arrests people for loud gum, when the officers jail a man for a party, the moral distance between them and a gang enforcing a bubble ban has narrowed almost to nothing. The costume is the only difference, and we have already seen how little the costume means. New Kelp City also gives you a glimpse of what happens when the arbitrary law impulse is allowed to run to its logical end, and it is honestly a little chilling under the comedy. A city criminalized happiness. It made the blowing of a bubble, an act of pure innocent delight, into an offense worth violently punishing. And that is the direction all of this arbitrary lawmaking points, toward the criminalization of joy itself, toward a world where the things that make life worth living become the things you can be punished for. Bikini Bottom has not gone quite that far, but it is on the same road. It jails a man for enjoying his own party. It sends a cashier away for a decade over a moment of desperation. It arrests protesters for defending a meadow. The step from that to outlawing bubbles outright is not a large one, and New Kelp City shows you where the path ends, in a place where the enforcers exist to stamp out delight, and the law is just a tool for making people miserable. What keeps the episode from being purely bleak is SpongeBob himself, and this is worth holding on to as we move toward the end of the night, because he is the answer these stories keep offering to all of this. In New Kelp City, as in every one of them, SpongeBob is the one who does not accept the absurd law, who blows the bubble anyway, who stands in front of the highway, who reports the crime he witnessed even when it costs him. He keeps behaving as though justice and joy and honesty are real and worth defending, even in a world that punishes him for it over and over. And there is something plainly heroic in that persistence, the refusal to be conditioned into the resignation that has claimed almost everyone else in these towns. The systems are broken, the police are corrupt or absent or absurd, the laws make no sense, and SpongeBob just keeps being decent anyway, keeps blowing bubbles in cities that have banned them. New Kelp City needed exactly that. One person who never learned to be afraid of joy, and it made him mayor for it, which is the small, hopeful answer to the darkness these stories keep diagnosing. There is a structural feature of the whole series we need to name directly, because it explains why the justice system of Bikini Bottom never improves, and never really means anything, and that feature is the reset. SpongeBob, like most episodic cartoons of its kind, runs on a status quo that snaps back into place at the end of nearly every story. Whatever happens, however dramatic, by the next episode the world is more or less back to where it started. And when you apply that rule to crime and punishment, you get a justice system that is, by its very nature, incapable of consequence. Nobody stays in jail. Nobody is ever truly reformed. Nobody is permanently removed. The villains are recaptured, not rehabilitated, and the innocents are released, not vindicated, and then the whole thing resets and does it all again next week. Look at the pattern across the recurring antagonists. Plankton is arrested, escapes, schemes again, is arrested again, in an endless loop that never resolves because it can never resolve, because a resolved Plankton would end the central conflict. The tattletale Strangler is caught, then loose, then caught again. The various menaces of Bikini Bottom cycle through custody like passengers through a revolving door, and none of it sticks, because none of it is allowed to stick. There is no permanent prison population in Bikini Bottom, no sense that the jails are slowly filling with the people who distinctly belong there, because the format requires everyone to be available again for the next story. The justice system is not a mechanism for actually removing threats from society. It is a set piece, a location the plot visits and then leaves, with no lasting effect on anyone who passes through it. That structural reality has a strange consequence for how we should read all the corruption and incompetence we have cataloged tonight. And it cuts in an interesting direction. On one hand, it means the stakes are never quite as dark as they might appear, because we know, on some level, that Squidward will not really serve 10 years, that Mrs. Puff will be back teaching next week, that no one is truly lost to the system forever. The reset is a mercy, in a way, a guarantee that the cruelty is never permanent. But on the other hand, it means the system never learns, never improves, never faces any accountability for its failures, because accountability requires consequences that carry forward, and nothing in this world carries forward. The police can abandon a witness, jail an innocent, lose a criminal, and none of it ever catches up with them, because the slate is wiped clean before any reckoning could arrive. The reset protects the citizens from permanent harm, but it also protects the police from ever having to change. It is worth separating out one part of the world that operates by different rules entirely, because it is easy to blur it into the justice system, and it genuinely is not the same thing. Bikini Bottom has a supernatural layer, a whole apparatus of ghosts and the afterlife, presided over by the Flying Dutchman, the ghostly pirate who haunts the seas and threatens to take people to a place called Davy Jones' Locker. That is a separate system from the mortal police and jails, a supernatural track running alongside the ordinary legal one, and it is important not to confuse the two. When a character is threatened by the Dutchman, that is not the justice system at work. That is the ghost mythology, its own set of rules about death and haunting and the beyond. The police send you to a cell, the Dutchman sends you somewhere else entirely. Keeping those straight matters, because the mortal justice system, for all its cruelty, never actually kills or eternally damns anyone, and it is the supernatural layer, not the police, that deals in fates worse than jail. The same care applies to the vigilantes, the parallel track of costume justice that runs through the series. We talked about SpongeBob and Patrick playing at heroism in shuffleboarding, but the genuine article, the retired heroes Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, along with self-appointed figures like Patrick in his superhero phase, represent a whole separate mode of law enforcement in Bikini Bottom, one that exists alongside the official police without ever really connecting to them. These vigilantes are not sworn officers. When they capture villains, when they fight crime, they are operating outside the official system entirely, and they get treated with the same skeptical, mocking eye that falls on the police themselves. Neither the official force nor the costumed heroes comes off as a reliable source of actual justice. Both are played, most of the time, as varieties of the same underlying joke, that everyone who takes on the role of protector in this world is, in one way or another, not up to it. When you put all of these structural pieces together, the reset that prevents consequence, the supernatural layer that handles the truly final fates, the vigilantes who muddy the line between official and unofficial force, you get a picture of a world where justice is not a system at all, but a collection of overlapping performances. The police perform authority, the vigilantes perform heroism, the courts, when they appear, perform sentencing, handing down decades and 22-year terms that everyone knows will not really be served. And underneath all of it, the reset guarantees that none of these performances have to add up to anything, that the whole apparatus can keep staging the drama of crime and punishment forever, without a single genuine outcome. It is theater, in the end, and everyone in Bikini Bottom is a player, cycling through the roles of officer and criminal and prisoner and victim as the week requires, in a production that never closes and never changes and never, ever means what it pretends to mean. I have gestured a few times tonight at the question of who is actually in charge of all this, and now I want to look straight at it, because the governance of Bikini Bottom is one of the strangest and most revealing things about the show, and it is the deepest reason the police behave the way they do. If you try to answer the simple question of who runs the town, who holds ultimate authority over it and its police, you get at least 3 different answers depending on which episode you are watching, and they do not fit together. In some episodes there is a mayor, a civic official presiding over the town in the ordinary way. In others there is a president, implying a whole different scale and structure of government. And hanging above all of it, at least according to certain episodes, is King Neptune, a literal sea god, described as the highest authority in the land, a monarch with divine power and a short temper. These are not compatible systems of government. A town cannot simultaneously be a municipality with a mayor, a republic with a president, and a kingdom under a sea god, at least not in any way that produces a coherent chain of command, and no attempt is ever made to reconcile them. Whichever authority a given story needs gets reached for, and the others are ignored, so that the government of Bikini Bottom is effectively whatever the plot requires in the moment, and nothing stable underneath. There is even an episode that muddies the waters further by having a character insist it is Poseidon, not Neptune, who truly rules the sea, tossing yet another claimant onto the pile. The effect of all this, whether the writers planned it or stumbled into it, is a town with no fixed government at all, no reliable structure of authority above the street-level officers we have followed all night. And that vacuum, I would argue, is the single most important fact for understanding the corruption and incompetence of the Bikini Bottom Police. Because accountability flows from structure. In a real system, a police officer answers to a chief, who answers to a mayor or a commissioner, who answers to voters or a council or some higher authority. And that chain, however imperfect, is what makes it possible to hold power to account. When a citizen is wronged, there is, at least in principle, somewhere to appeal. Someone above the officer who can review what happened. But in Bikini Bottom, that chain does not exist. There is no stable authority above the police, because there is no stable authority above anything. The mayor might be in charge this week, or the president, or Neptune, or Poseidon, and a citizen wronged by an officer has no idea who to even complain to, let alone any confidence that the complaint would matter. The officers float free of any oversight, because the oversight was never built. This is why they can arrest a man for not inviting them to a party and face no consequence. It is why they can abandon a witness to a strangler and never answer for it. Why they can hand out 10-year sentences and 22-year sentences on a whim. Why they can be stored in a rich crab's safe-like property. There is nothing above them. The whole apparatus of accountability that we take for granted, the idea that even the police have someone they must answer to, simply does not function in this world. Because the town never settled the basic question of who governs it. King Neptune, for all his divine authority, is not the everyday police chief. He does not review arrests or hear citizen grievances or manage the department. He is a distant, godlike figure who shows up when a crown is stolen and vanishes the rest of the time, leaving the day-to-day exercise of power in the hands of officers who answer, functionally, to no one at all. There is a surprisingly unsettling political idea buried in that arrangement, and it never gets stated but keeps getting demonstrated. Power without accountability corrupts, not necessarily into grand villainy, but into exactly the kind of petty, lazy, arbitrary abuse we have been cataloging all night. The Bikini Bottom Police are not evil masterminds. They are ordinary fish given power over their neighbors and no reason to use it well, no one watching, no one to whom they must justify themselves. No consequence for cruelty and no reward for justice. And what emerges from that condition is not dramatic tyranny but something more mundane and more true to life, a force that does what is easy, punishes what is convenient, ignores what is hard, and serves whoever happens to have money or a crown, because there is no structure in place to make it do otherwise. The writers built a world with a hole where its government should be, and the police expanded to fill that hole. And everything corrupt about them grows out of that original absence. What I find frankly clever about the way all of this is handled is that it never lectures. No character ever stands up to explain that the town suffers from a crisis of institutional accountability. It just shows you, episode after episode, a mayor here and a president there, and a sea god above them, none of it adding up, and lets you feel the incoherence rather than hear it described. You absorb the ungovernability of Bikini Bottom the way you absorb the color of its water, as a background condition of the world. And only when you stack the police episodes up against each other does the connection surface. That the reason these officers are the way they are is that they exist in a town that never decided who was in charge. The corruption is not a flaw added to the police. It is the natural weather of a place with no sky above it, no fixed authority, no answer to the oldest question any society has to answer, which is simply, who watches the ones we give the power to watch us? Let me take you on a tour of the actual buildings now, the physical infrastructure of confinement in Bikini Bottom, because more of it has been established than most viewers realize, and the details, once you gather them, paint a portrait of a town that has invested a strange amount of imagination in how to lock people up. There are at least 3 distinct detention facilities in this world, and they should not be blurred together, because each has its own character and its own logic. The first and most ordinary is the Bikini Bottom Jail, the main holding facility, the general population building where most of the arrests we have discussed tonight end up. This is where SpongeBob spends his party night, where Mrs. Puff serves most of her sentences, where Plankton is shown in his cell being pointed out to new recruits. It is the workhorse of the system, the default cell the plot reaches for whenever someone needs to be jailed. And the Bikini Bottom jail has some seriously odd features established over the years, little details that reward attention. There is, according to the canon collected by the Fan Encyclopedia, a cafeteria that serves chili, giving the place a mundane institutional texture, the prison meal as a running background element. There is a cell described as having extra security that appears to be essentially bottomless, a pit of a holding space that drops away beneath the prisoner, the kind of surreal architectural flourish these writers love, a cell that punishes by sheer disorienting depth. And, as we noted when we visited Doing Time, there is the matter of apparent gender segregation. The prison Mrs. Puff is sent to showing no male inmates at all, implying a facility or a wing organized along those lines. None of these details are dwelt on. They flash by in the background of episodes, but collected together they suggest a jail with more thought put into its quirks than into any question of justice, an institution rich in strange architecture and poor in fairness. The second facility is the one built specifically for Plankton and his kind, and it is one of my favorite pieces of the world building, precisely because it is so absurdly specific. It is called the Institution for the Criminally Tiny, and it is exactly what the name says. A prison designed to hold criminals who are very small, at the scale of Plankton. Think about what it means that this exists as a distinct facility. The town has enough tiny criminals, or at least enough concern about tiny criminals, to warrant a purpose-built prison for them, a whole institution devoted to the incarceration of the miniature. And it connects to the recurring gag of Plankton being held in a safe, a small vault used as an extremely small cell, the confinement scaled down to match the prisoner. There is something almost tender in the town's willingness to build custom infrastructure for its smallest offender, and something absurd in the fact that it will design a specialized micro-prison while failing at every larger question of justice. The town cannot hold a fair trial, but it will build you a tiny jail if you are tiny enough to need one. The third facility we have already visited, the maximum security Inferno Island, the escape-proof island prison run by the warden, and I bring it back into the tour only to underline how it completes the picture. Between these three, you have a fully articulated carceral system, more articulated than the town's government, more articulated than its police force's accountability, more articulated than almost anything else in its civic life. There is the ordinary jail for ordinary offenders, the specialized institution for the tiny, and the brutal island for the ones the system wants truly gone. The town has thought carefully about how to sort and hold its prisoners by scale and severity. Tiny criminals here, general population there, the worst cases out on the island, beyond the reach of any swimmer. It is a strikingly developed prison architecture, and the care lavished on it stands in stark, telling contrast to the carelessness lavished on the question of who ends up inside. That contrast is the thing I keep circling, and it might be the sharpest single observation to draw from the physical infrastructure. Bikini Bottom has built an elaborate, multi-tiered, thoughtfully designed system for punishing people, and an essentially non-existent system for determining whether those people deserve punishment. The back end is sophisticated. The front end is a coin flip. Enormous energy has gone into the cells and the islands and the tiny institutions and the bottomless security pits, and almost none into the investigation, the trial, the basic work of matching punishment to guilt. And that imbalance is, in its own way, the truest thing these stories say about how such systems can go wrong in real life. It is always easier to build a prison than to build justice. Cells are concrete and straightforward. Fairness is hard, invisible, endless work. And a society that finds itself with beautiful prisons and terrible justice has simply followed the path of least resistance, has done the easy concrete thing and skipped the hard invisible one, exactly as Bikini Bottom has. There is a final detail about the physical spaces worth sitting with, which is how often these jails are played as almost pleasant, almost cozy, once you are actually inside them. Mrs. Puff finds peace in her cell. The prisoners in various episodes settle into routines. The jail, for all its bottomless security cells and its chilly cafeteria, is rarely depicted as a place of real suffering in the way you might expect, and that softness is part of what makes the town's carceral obsession so strange. It is not that Bikini Bottom is a cruel dystopia of grim dungeons. It is that it has made incarceration so ordinary, so woven into daily life, that a cell is just another room a citizen might find themselves in on any given week, no more frightening than a waiting room, a place you go and then leave and then go again. The horror is not that the jails are terrible. The horror is that they are normal, that being locked up has become such a routine feature of life in this town that the buildings meant to punish have taken on the texture of just another part of the neighborhood. Having gone through so many individual cases, I want to pull two threads together now, because the corruption of Bikini Bottom policing is really two opposite failures happening at once, and it is the combination that makes it so complete. On one side, there is the over-policing, the eagerness to arrest and punish the harmless, the party jailings and the wallet sentences, and the litter tickets and the absurd charges for chewing and untied shoes. On the other side, there is the under-policing, the negligence, the abandoned witness, the escaped strangler, the town left to be conquered while the officers are nowhere to be found. And it would be easy to think of these as contradictory, a force that is somehow both too aggressive and too lazy at the same time. But they are not contradictory at all. They are the same failure, and understanding why is the key to the whole thing. The single principle that unites them is this: the Bikini Bottom police always do what is easy and gratifying to themselves, and never do what is hard. Arresting a harmless citizen is easy. He does not resist, he does not fight back, he is right there, compliant, an effortless target who lets you feel the pleasure of exercising power at no risk. So they do it constantly, because it is the path of least resistance and it flatters the ego. But confronting an actual criminal is hard. It involves danger, effort, the possibility of failure, real work. So they avoid it. They let the strangler go. They abandon the witness. They vanish when the town is truly threatened. The over-policing and the under-policing are two expressions of a single underlying laziness and self-interest. The force pours its energy into the easy targets precisely because it has none to spare for the hard ones, and both halves of that equation harm the people the police are supposed to protect. Once you see it that way, every episode we have discussed clicks into the same frame. The party arrest and the abandoned witness are not opposite behaviors. They are the same officer making the same choice, to do the effortless, satisfying thing and skip the difficult, frightening thing, applied to two different situations. When the easy option is an arrest, they arrest. When the easy option is walking away, they walk away. There is no principle guiding the choice except their own comfort, which is exactly why the results look so wildly inconsistent from the outside. Harsh here and negligent there. 10 years for a wallet, but a shrug for a serial strangler. The inconsistency is the tell. A police force guided by justice would be consistent, would come down hard on real threats and lightly on harmless mistakes. A force guided purely by self-interest produces exactly the scrambled, backwards pattern we see, because self-interest and justice point in different directions, and Bikini Bottom's police follow self-interest every single time. And this, I think, is why the satire lands as more than just silly, why these episodes have stuck in the minds of viewers enough to inspire whole discussions and wiki pages and, well, videos like this one, because the pattern being drawn is a recognizable one. The tendency of institutions to pour their energy into easy, showy, satisfying actions against soft targets, while avoiding the hard, thankless, dangerous work that actually matters, is not a fantasy invented for a cartoon. It is a thing people recognize from the real world, a failure mode of power that shows up wherever authority operates without accountability. SpongeBob did not set out to make a documentary about it. It set out to be funny, but comedy, when it is good, finds the true shape of things almost by accident, and the true shape it found in its police is this business of taking the easy road at everyone else's expense, dressed up in boat cars and jellyfish and a chili-serving jail. There is a real generosity in how all this gets delivered though, and I do not want to lose sight of it as we near the end, because for all that I have been describing a corrupt and broken system, the tone of SpongeBob is almost never bitter. It is not an angry show. It does not see that it's police or ask you to hate them. It observes their failures with a kind of bright, absurd amusement, turning each injustice into a joke rather than a grievance. And there is something almost forgiving in that. It seems to understand that these officers are not monsters, that they are ordinary fish, caught in a system with no accountability, doing the small selfish things ordinary people do when nothing stops them. It laughs at them rather than condemning them, and the laughter is somehow closer to the truth than condemnation would be. Because most real failures of this kind are not the work of villains either. They are the work of ordinary people taking the easy road. And a show that can make you laugh at that while showing you, without a word of lecture, how it works has done something more useful than 100 angrier stories. That balance, the ability to hold a truly dark observation inside a genuinely warm comedy, is the thing I keep marveling at as I go back through these episodes. A lesser show would have to choose. It would either play the corruption straight and become a grim satire, or ignore the implications entirely and just do gags with no weight underneath. SpongeBob does both at once, gives you the party arrest as a laugh and as a small tragedy in the same breath, lets you enjoy the 10-year sentence as an absurd punchline, while the disproportion of it registers somewhere underneath all the same. And that doubleness is why it rewards the kind of attention we have been paying it tonight. On the surface, it is bright nonsense, a sponge and his friends having adventures. Underneath it is one of the most sustained portraits of institutional dysfunction that mainstream animation has ever produced. And the miracle is that it never once stops being fun while being that. The corruption is real. The comedy is real. And they are, somehow, the same thing. It is worth stepping outside the show for a while to place all of this in the real world, because the police material did not appear all at once, and the way it developed across the series tells its own story. SpongeBob SquarePants premiered on Nickelodeon on the 1st of May 1999 with the pilot episode called Help Wanted, and it was the creation of Steven Hillenburg, a man whose background makes the whole thing make a particular kind of sense. Hillenburg was not a typical cartoonist. He was a marine science educator before he was an animator, someone who taught and studied ocean life, and he brought that genuine knowledge of the sea into the show's DNA, which is part of why Bikini Bottom feels like such a fully imagined underwater world rather than just a backdrop. He had also worked in animation before, notably on another beloved series about a nervous wallaby navigating a strange town, and that earlier experience with off-kilter, slightly surreal suburban comedy fed directly into the sensibility of SpongeBob. If you track the police and justice material across the long run, you notice that the absurd arrest gags are not evenly distributed. The early seasons certainly plant the seeds, with the first season hall monitor story and the second season episodes we discussed. But those early jailings tend to be a bit more grounded, a bit more tied to genuine cause and consequence. Mrs. Puff goes to jail because a boat really was stolen or a crash really happened. As the series goes on, and especially in the later seasons, the arrests get more purely absurd, more detached from any real offense, leaning harder into the pure comedy of the ridiculous charge. By the time you reach episodes like the cookie-selling arrest or the parade of jailings for chewing too loudly and untied shoes, the arrest has become an absurdist gag in its own right, something to be enjoyed for its sheer disproportion rather than justified by any plot logic. The corruption theme sharpens and intensifies over time, the way a show's signature ideas often do as its writers grow more confident in them. This matters for anyone trying to keep the chronology straight, and it is the kind of thing viewers love to fact-check, so let me be precise about it. The episodes I have discussed tonight span a wide stretch of the show's history, from the very first season at the end of the 1990s, through episodes that aired well into the following decades. The wallet sentence episode with Squidward belongs to the 5th season, not earlier, despite some lower-quality sources misfiling it. The absurd arrests parade with the superhero costumes belongs to the 6th season. The cookie seller episode comes much later, in the 11th season, by which point the show had been running for the better part of 2 decades. Getting these placements right matters, because the development of the police theme across that span is part of the story, the way an idea that started as an occasional plot device grew into one of the reliable comic engines. The most significant real-world fact hanging over the later years is the loss of the show's creator. Steven Hillenburg was diagnosed with the illness known as ALS in 2017, and he died on the 26th of November 2018, at the age of 57. It was a genuine loss, mourned widely, and the series has continued producing new episodes and films after his death, carried on by the team and the world he built. I mention it here not to speculate about anything private, which would not be right, but simply to mark the fact, because a great deal of the police and justice material, the sharpening of that satire into its most absurd late forms, unfolded across the whole arc of the show's life. Some of it made while Hillenburg was still involved, and some of it after. The world he made, with its ungoverned town and its accountability-free police, proved durable enough to keep generating these stories long past its creator, which shows how solidly the underlying comic machine was built. And built solidly it was, because here we are, more than 25 years after that first episode aired, with the series having produced hundreds of episodes across more than 15 seasons and several feature films, still running, still one of the longest-running American animated shows ever made. That longevity is staggering when you stop to consider it. A cartoon about a sponge who flips hamburgers has outlasted countless prestige dramas and cultural phenomena, has become a permanent fixture of the culture, a set of characters that essentially everyone alive today recognizes on sight. And woven through all those hundreds of episodes, remarkably consistent from the first season to the latest, is this strange, sharp, funny portrait of a town whose police cannot be trusted. A running satire that has been playing in the background of one of the most watched children's shows in history for a quarter of a century. Millions of people absorbed the lesson of Bikini Bottom's corrupt police without ever quite noticing they were absorbing it, laughing at the party arrest, the wallet sentence, the cops in the safe, the whole record we have gone through tonight. There is something almost fitting about the fact that this material lives inside a show designed for children, because the observations underneath it are exactly the kind of thing you learn young and spend the rest of your life relearning. That authority is not always right, that the people with the badges do not always deserve them, that a system can look impressive with all its vehicles and units and buildings and still fail at the one thing it exists to do, that power without accountability curdles into pettiness. SpongeBob never says any of this out loud. It just shows a small yellow sponge going about his life in a town where the police are a source of chaos rather than order, and lets generations of children absorb, through laughter, a truth about institutions that a lot of adults never fully face. The corruption of Bikini Bottom's police is a joke, one of the best and most enduring the show has, and like all the best jokes, it is funny precisely because, somewhere underneath, it is true. There is one crime that comes up so often in these episodes that it deserves to be pulled out and examined on its own, because it works as a kind of emblem for the whole broken system, and that crime is littering. If you go back through the police stories of Bikini Bottom, you find littering everywhere, treated with a seriousness wildly out of proportion to what it is, cropping up again and again as the offense the town reaches for when it wants to punish someone. Mrs. Puff is arrested for littering in one episode, and the specific act is shredding a note and letting the pieces fall. The tattletale Strangler, a truly menacing figure, is initially arrested for littering, of all things, as though dropping trash were somehow the notable thing about him. SpongeBob and Squidward get ticketed for littering over a garbage statue in an episode built around cleaning the town up. The dedicated sanitation police exist as a whole branch of law enforcement devoted to keeping Bikini Bottom clean. Littering is, in a very real sense, the signature crime of this universe. And the prominence of littering tells you almost everything about the priorities of Bikini Bottom law enforcement, because think about what littering actually is. It is the pettiest of offenses, a minor matter of tidiness, the kind of thing that in the real world earns you a small fine at most, and usually not even that. It harms no one directly. It is about as far from a serious crime as an act can be, while still being technically against the rules. And this is the crime Bikini Bottom has elevated to prominence, the offense its police seem most energized to pursue, the charge that gets a menacing figure like the Strangler taken into custody. A town obsessed with littering is a town that has decided the appearance of order, the surface tidiness of the streets, matters more than any deeper question of justice or safety. It is policing as aesthetics, punishing the visible small mess while the real dangers walk free. The Strangler example is the sharpest version of this, and it repays a second look through this particular lens. Here is a figure presented as deeply threatening, a large, intimidating character with, the episode implies, a real capacity for harm. And the thing that gets him arrested, the offense the system actually pins on him, is littering. Not any of the menacing things about him, littering. The police, faced with a genuine potential danger, reach past everything alarming about him and grab the tidiness violation, because the tidiness violation is easy and clear and fits the kind of policing they know how to do. And then, having arrested the dangerous figure for the trivial crime, they promptly lose him and refuse to protect his victim, exactly as we discussed. The whole tragedy of that episode is encoded in the choice of charge. A town that arrests its most dangerous resident for littering is a town that has completely lost the thread of what policing is for. that has substituted the enforcement of surface neatness for the protection of its people. I find the sanitation police, as a concept, plainly fascinating in this light, because it represents the institutionalization of exactly this misplaced priority. This is not an ad hoc thing, an officer happening to write a littering ticket. It is a whole dedicated branch, a standing force whose entire purpose is the cleanliness of the town, resources and personnel and authority, all committed to the pursuit of tidiness. Bikini Bottom looked at the full range of things a police force might prioritize, all the dangers and injustices a town might organize itself to prevent, and it decided that keeping the streets free of litter warranted its own specialized division. Meanwhile, there is no equivalent dedicated force we ever see for, say, protecting citizens from serial stranglers, or for investigating actual crimes with any competence. The specialized energy of the department flows toward the surface, toward appearances, toward the visible and the trivial, and away from the substantive and the hard. This connects to the other specialized units we touched on at the very start of the night, the music police most of all, because it reveals a consistent logic in how Bikini Bottom chooses to specialize its enforcement. A music police, a unit concerned with the sounds people make. A sanitation police, a unit concerned with the tidiness of the streets. These are forces dedicated to controlling the texture of daily life, the small sensory business of how the town looks and sounds, rather than to any serious protective function. The town has built its police out into branches devoted to policing pleasure and mess and noise, the ordinary stuff of living, while leaving the actual work of justice to a general force that cannot manage it. It is the arrest for loud gum given an institutional home. It is the criminalization of the small joys and small messes of life, formalized into departments. And it points at a vision of policing that is fundamentally about control of the trivial rather than protection from the serious. When I lay it all out like this, the littering obsession stops looking like a random recurring gag and starts looking like the thematic center of the whole thing. These stories keep returning to littering because littering is the perfect crime for a police force like this one, the ideal offense for a system that wants the feeling of enforcement without the difficulty of justice. It is easy to spot, easy to prove, easy to punish, harms no one, and lets the officers feel useful and powerful while risking and accomplishing nothing. A dropped piece of paper cannot fight back. A garbage statue does not flee or scheme or endanger anyone. Littering is the safest possible target, and a police force devoted to safe targets will naturally elevate it above everything else, will build whole divisions around it, will arrest its most dangerous residents for it, because it does not know how to arrest them for anything real. The town's favorite crime is its most trivial one, and that single fact, once you see it, explains the whole strange, funny, broken machine we have spent this long night taking apart. As we come toward the end, I want to try to imagine, just for a while, what it would actually be like to live as an ordinary citizen of Bikini Bottom under this system, because I think that is where all of this finally lands, in the texture of a life lived under a police force like this one. Picture waking up in that town on any given morning. You go about your day, you do your work, you see your friends, and the whole time there is a background hum of arbitrary risk that you have simply learned to live with. Any small thing you do might, on the wrong day, in front of the wrong officer, become a crime. Enjoying your own party, dropping a scrap of paper, grabbing a wallet to read a name, standing up for a Meadow you love, blowing a bubble in the wrong city. None of these are things a reasonable person would fear, and yet in this world every one of them has landed someone in a cell, and the citizens know it, and they carry that knowledge as a low, constant weight. And it is not a loud fear, which is the strange part of it. It is not the terror of a police state with searchlights and midnight knocks at the door. It is quieter and more corrosive than that, a small ongoing arithmetic that runs underneath everything. You learn which officers to avoid on which streets. You learn not to draw attention, not to be the loudest voice at the party, not to be the one holding the wallet when the music stops. You develop the instinct of the perpetually watched, the habit of scanning a room for the badge before you let yourself relax, and you pass that instinct along to your children without ever meaning to, until an entire town has folded itself into a slightly smaller shape than it was born to be. The thing that makes it land is that none of the fear is ever shown to you directly. You are shown the shape people have bent themselves into, the shrug, the resignation, the easy assumption of guilt, and left to infer the long years of pressure that produced it. That is why so many of the characters behave the way they do. and it is the saddest thread running under all the comedy. It is why SpongeBob accepts his party arrest as bad luck rather than outrage. It is why Krabs and SpongeBob leap straight to covering up a death rather than trusting the law. It is why two friends flee town over a balloon. It is why Mrs. Puff, arrested for the 8th time over things she did not do, stops fighting and starts finding peace in her cell. These are the adaptations of people who have learned, through long experience, that the system above them is not rational and cannot be reasoned with, that fairness is not something they can count on, that the safest thing to do when authority turns its eye on you is to lower your head and wait for it to pass. They have made themselves small and careful and resigned, because that is what survives in a place like this, and the show, for all its brightness, never lets you fully forget the shape of that resignation. And yet, against all of it, there is SpongeBob, and I keep returning to him because he is the one who never quite breaks the way you would expect. He lives under the same broken system as everyone else. He has been jailed and chased and arrested and abandoned by the police as much as anyone, and he simply keeps being himself anyway. He keeps reporting the crimes he witnesses even when it costs him. He keeps standing up for the places and the friends he loves. He keeps blowing his bubbles. He keeps believing, against a mountain of evidence, that the world is basically good and that doing the right thing is worth it, and the show never punishes that belief hard enough to kill it. There is a stubbornness in his innocence that reads, "The more of these episodes you watch, less like naivety and more like a kind of quiet resistance, the refusal to let a corrupt and arbitrary system turn him as small and careful and afraid as it has turned everyone around him." Maybe that is the real answer the show offers to the darkness we have been tracing all night. Not a reform of the police, not a fixing of the system, which the format could never allow anyway, but simply the example of one character who refuses to be diminished by it. Bikini Bottom will never get better. The reset guarantees it. The police will be exactly as corrupt and incompetent next season as they were in the first. The jails will keep filling and emptying. The absurd arrests will keep coming. But SpongeBob will keep meeting all of it with the same open heart, keep being kind in a town that gives him every reason not to be, and there is something distinctly moving in that when you finally see it clearly. He is the answer to his own world, the proof that a person can live under an unjust system and still refuse to let it make them unjust or afraid, and that might be one of the more valuable things a children's show could possibly teach, buried there under the boat cars and the jellyfish and the chili-serving jail. So that is the record, the whole strange catalog of how policing works and fails in Bikini Bottom, the party arrests and the wallet sentences, the abandoned witnesses and the escaped stranglers, the island prison and the tiny institution, and the cops folded up in a rich crab safe, the littering obsession and the anonymous officers, and the town with no one truly in charge above them. It is a portrait, drawn in bright colors and played for laughs across more than 2 decades, of authority without accountability and the small daily damage it does, and it is one of the more honest things mainstream animation has ever gotten away with, precisely because it never once stopped being funny while it did. If you drift back from all the individual episodes now, and let them blur together into a single impression, what you are left with is something a little unexpected for a cartoon about a sponge, which is a surprisingly coherent vision of a place. Bikini Bottom is not a random assortment of gags. It is a fully imagined town, with its bright streets and its Krusty Krab and its boating school and its jails, and running through all of it is this consistent, strange truth about how power works there. A truth the show never announces but never stops demonstrating. It is a town where the people meant to keep order are the least ordered thing in it, where the badge is a costume and the law is a mood, where an ordinary citizen can lose a night or a decade of their life to the whim of an officer who will never be asked to explain themselves. And somehow, out of that unpromising material, the show made comfort. It made something millions of people put on to feel safe and warm and at ease, something you might be drifting off to right now. That is a strange alchemy when you stop to consider it, taking a portrait of unaccountable authority and petty injustice and turning it into a bedtime companion, into the soft, familiar hum you reach for at the end of a hard day. Most stories about corruption leave you tense and unsettled. This one, somehow, tucks you in. That is the part that stays with me most, the strange gentleness of it all. A show could take these observations, a corrupt police force, a town with no real government, a justice system that punishes the innocent and loses the guilty, and turn them into something bitter and hard to watch. SpongeBob does the opposite. It takes the same raw truths and wraps them in warmth and color and kindness. In a hero who never stops being decent. In a world that is broken but never cruel enough to break him. And the result is one of the most beloved and durable things the culture has ever produced. For more than 25 years it has been there, in the background of countless childhoods and countless quiet nights, teaching a soft lesson about authority and accountability to people who mostly did not know they were being taught anything at all. There is a real artistry in that, in hiding something true inside something comforting, and the more time you spend with it, the more of it you find. And maybe that is why a video like this one can exist at all, why it is even possible to spend a long night gently pulling apart the police of a cartoon and have it feel soothing rather than grim. The show did the hard part first. It took something that ought to unsettle us, the sight of power used carelessly against the powerless, and it turned that into warmth, into a place people return to for comfort. All I have done tonight is walk slowly through the machinery underneath, name the parts, and hold each one up to the light, and the fact that it stays gentle the whole way through is entirely the show's doing and not mine. Bikini Bottom absorbs its own darkness so completely that you can study it at your leisure, half asleep, and never once feel the cold of it. That is a rare quality in any story, and rarer still in one that has this much true to say underneath the color. So as you lie there, wherever you are, with the lights low and the day finally behind you, maybe let that be the last thought you carry down into sleep, that even a place as broken as Bikini Bottom, a town whose police cannot be trusted and whose government does not exist, and whose jails are always full, can still be a place of warmth, still be home to a sponge who loves his job and his friends and his little patch of the sea, still be somewhere you would want to visit night after night. The corruption is real, and we spent a long time tonight tracing every strange contour of it. But it never wins, not really, because the heart of the show was never in its police. It was always in the small yellow figure who keeps being good anyway, in a world that keeps giving him every reason to stop. Thank you for spending this long, quiet stretch of night with me, and for letting all these silly, strange, oddly true stories about a cartoon town carry you toward rest. There is something nice, I think, in falling asleep to the gentle dismantling of something you thought you already knew, in discovering that a show you have seen 100 times has been holding a whole hidden portrait all along, patiently, the entire time. I hope it kept you company. I hope your eyes are heavy by now and the room is warm and the weight of the day has finally lifted. Let the water go dark, let Bikini Bottom fade, and drift the rest of the way down. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.